closing lines to the front.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We have a green light. We're ready to go. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on February 7th, 2020. On today's agenda, we have one item to discuss in closed session. That is an update on power with purpose. We will endeavor to conclude the closed session discussion as close to 10 a.m. as possible so that we can begin the public portion of the meeting. In the event that we do not complete our closed session discussion this morning, we will move to continue the closed session discussion after the public session ends. Director Kavanaugh, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Yes, I move the board go into closed session at this time, 9 a.m. to discuss an update on power with purpose generation and resource project. Closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitively sensitive utility infrastructure information, including potential pricing and types and locations of resources that would create a competitive disadvantage for the district if known by its business competitors, and also would create a competitive disadvantage for the district if known by potential contractors and property owners that may be involved in the infrastructure projects.
This motion requires a second. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Wagner? Yes.
Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Gay,
Yes.
and McGuire is unable to attend today. Mulhoff,
Yes.
Moody,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Yoder.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion to go into closed session has passed. The closed session will be limited to discussion regarding an update on power with purpose. No votes or other action will be taken. Okay. We'll shut it down. After completing the closed session, and no further business was discussed during that time. Earlier before the closed session, I made an announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. Today we'll hear from the following committee reports. Mr. Tim Gay will discuss finance. Mr. Rick Yoder will handle system management and nuclear oversight. I will handle public information, and Mr. Kavanaugh will handle governance. And now it's time for the safety briefing.
Great, thank you very much. You're on the 9th floor on the west side of Energy Plaza. The fire extinguishers are right behind me in this room. Also down the hallway near the restrooms as well. The first aid kit and the AED are one on top of each other next to the right of the elevators. Is anybody here certified in the use of an AED or in CPR? So there's quite a few people here. Kevin, would you call 911 in the event that we need it? I appreciate that. There are a couple exits to this room here, but to exit this floor, it would be to the left of the elevators. We would actually go all the way down to the main level, exit out on the 17th Street side of the building. In the event we needed to secure ourselves in the building, we would be escorted by our emergency resource folks to an appropriate place. And we'll make sure that we do that. In case of a fire, please do not use the elevators. And again, we would exit, the nearest exit here, go down the steps and all the way out on the 17th Street side of the building and assemble at the Douglas County parking garage. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor, or as someone suggested today, please use Purell or any other kinds of disinfectant with all the flus and coughs and sneezes that are going around this room anyway. As I said before, Kevin will call 911 the event that we need it. That concludes our safety briefing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Next on the agenda, one of the things that I'm going to do during all committee meetings is to elevate one of our policies. I think we're all, especially from a board standpoint, really dialed in on the strategic directives. I think we know them by number and are very comfortable with them, but I think we tend to sort of let policies kind of slide into the background a little bit. So every Tuesday, I'm gonna go through and I make it a habit to read these before every board meeting, so I'm gonna choose one. We're gonna put it up on the screen, and we're gonna do what my daughter does in 3rd grade, and we're just gonna go around the room and read the thing together. Just as an act of making sure that we're keeping these things front of mind as we go through. So, with that in mind, I'll read the preamble, and then I'm gonna start with Mr. McCormick, and we're just gonna go right down the line and read each bullet as we go. Everybody on the same page? We good? Okay. The corporate powers of OPPD shall be vested in the board of directors and shall be exercised in such a manner as to confer upon OPPD's customer owners the benefits of a successful and profitable operation and conduct of its business. The board of directors operates under the provisions of the Nebraska Revised Statutes, Chapter 70, Article 6, also known as the Enabling Act.
The Board of Directors shall, in accordance with the President and the Chief Executive Officer, CEO, identify and define the vision and mission of OPPD and establish strategic directions OPPD is to achieve, communicating them in the form of policies.
Monitor and measure the results of the strategic directives.
Make certain decisions as designated by the Enabling Act or other statutes.
Appoint, evaluate, and when necessary, discharge the CEO.
There you go.
Oh
Wow.
man, you made it hard on us.
Okay, yeah.
It's diligent if you
For
need
the old
it.
people.
The CEO shall lead in coordination with the board, the development and implementation of OPPD's vision, mission, and strategy.
Manage all operations and business affairs of OPPD with a primary focus on leadership of the OPPD senior management team to implement OPPD strategic directives.
Communicate regularly and effectively with the board on the business of OPPD.
Manage the implementation of systems and policies that enable OPPD to conduct its activities both lawfully and ethically.
Prepare and submit the corporate operating plan to the board for review and approval each year and ensure all OPPD expenditures are within the authorized annual corporate operating plan.
Make recommendations to the board regarding the appointment of vice presidents.
Manage the appropriate organization and staffing of OPPD and exercise the authority to hire and terminate staff and employees as necessary to enable OPPD to achieve all business objectives.
Attend meetings of the board and report on the general affairs of OPPD, ensuring sufficient information is provided to the board in order to make appropriate judgments or to take necessary actions.
In coordination with the senior management team and outside general counsel, assess the principal risks of OPPD and take appropriate and necessary actions to monitor and manage these risks and, when necessary, report risks to the board.
Communicate effectively with customer owners, employees, government authorities, other stakeholders, and the public in general. CEO shall assure in cooperation and consultation with the board that OPPD is appropriately represented in the community.
Perform other duties as may be delegated by the board, either by resolution or through the CEO's contract of employment.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll start at the other end of the table next month. As I said, I think these policies are extraordinarily important. I think we tend to sort of let them fall into the background, so this is a way to elevate them a little bit. I'm welcome to feedback from the board on which policy to highlight next week. Next month. Okay, we're gonna move on to the finance report, Director Gay.
Yeah, there won't be much of a report. I'll turn it over to Javier in a minute, but as we discussed last year, the reporting's gonna be a little bit differently, so I'll let him discuss that. And then, of course, Director Bogner will be the finance chair going forward, in the next meeting. So Javier, do you have an update on the dates? We're gonna do that just off the.
Certainly, so last month, my participation in the meeting was very short because it's January, we typically don't have to close books by January, and then this month is almost the same, and we're making a deviation from past practice, and one of the things that I proposed to Director Gay last year and the Finance Committee last year was in an effort to provide more better quality financial discussion without taking away the financial information that is shared with the board. I proposed changing the cadence and the reporting means to the board that should provide a more a better quality financial discussion. So with that, I'm gonna talk about the things that are not changing and the things that are changing, just quickly. The monthly financial and operating report, or the F&O report, there's no update on that one. The board will continue to receive that one, and it will still be subject to board approval under the consent agenda during the board meeting of the month following the F&O report, just like it has been, and that's not changing. However, the monthly financial report that I would typically do at this meeting every month, that's a change. I'm no longer planning to report these monthly report at the committee meeting. However, the information that I used to report here will be replaced by a monthly dashboard, a financial dashboard, that will be shared with the board on the Friday closest to the middle of the month following the reported month. So you will still get the same information we used to have on revenues, expenditures, net income, capital expenditures. It's gonna be all condensed in a dashboard format for your consumption every month. Now, something that's new as well is a quarterly report. This is an in-depth report that will go to the finance subcommittee. And I plan to discuss financial results on a quarterly basis with the finance subcommittee. This will happen approximately 40 days after the reported quarter ends. So, for example, in the quarter that ends March 31st, I'm planning to report to the finance subcommittee in the May subcommittee meeting. And I say approximately, it depends on the date that we schedule the finance subcommittee meeting. That will be followed by a quarterly dashboard and a financial update that I'm planning to make at this meeting, approximately 45 days after the reported quarter. So in the mid-May, in the May committee meeting, I'm planning to discuss quarterly financial data for the previous quarter. So you will still get a discussion, we'll engage in a dialogue, but in my opinion, it'll be a much richer dialogue, because the data will encompass 3 months, where you can see better trends, where we're not subject to the month-to-month true-ups and things that happen month-to-month that may cause a lot of noise, and instead focus on the trend where the utility's going.
I'm sorry, so the data that will be reported will be only on a quarterly basis. It will not show 3 monthly data points between each of the reports?
Correct, well, you will still get monthly, so for example, for the March meeting, you will still get the January, February and March dashboards, but we will not discuss them here. I'm gonna discuss them in aggregate, which I believe it's, now, if something happened in February or in January, I will definitely point out to that event, but generally speaking, I'm planning to discuss this on a quarterly basis on trends and more actionable items that will be probably more productive for the board and senior management to discuss. One thing that will not change is the annual report. The annual report will continue to be shared with the finance subcommittee in March. This is a meeting that we have every year with our auditors, our external auditors and the finance subcommittee. We go through the financial report in detail, balance sheet, cash flow statements, income statements, and we have auditors in the room. That will continue to happen, and it happens in March, mid-March. Something that is new, that I'm very excited about this, is I am going to present an annual report to this body.
Okay.
We typically don't talk about the year end at this body, because we have the audit that happens, January, February, March. By March it's too late and we're already into the new year. We haven't really taken the time to reflect on what happened last year. This time around, I'm gonna present at the next committee meeting in March. It's gonna be unaudited, it's gonna be preliminary, it's gonna be high level, I cannot share information before the audit is done, but I will present an annual dashboard, if you will, sharing what 2019 looked like the full 12 years, the full 12 months. So in summary, there's 3 new things that are being added: the financial dashboard, monthly financial dashboard, quarterly report and financial update, and the annual report here at the committee meeting. Those are 3 additions. The one subtraction is gonna be the monthly report that I used to do in the past. That will be replaced by the monthly dashboard. Any questions? And we have all of these calendared, and Director Bogner, I have to sit down with you and go over the calendar and schedule, but it's we have specific dates and cadence for all these reports. And that concludes my report.
Good. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. It's been great. On to systems management and nuclear oversight. Director Yoder.
Great, thank you. Last Tuesday morning, the systems committee met and we talked about a few things. And it looks like we've got quite a bit of action coming up here for Thursday night, so we'll be talking about that here in just a minute. But last Tuesday, the discussion within the systems committee started off with a review of SD7 and kind of board members' expectations on the report out, and particularly the report outs that we will be getting for the new bullet on decarbonization of the net zero carbon by 2050. And so, you know, really it was just to reinforce some discussion we've already had that the board doesn't expect us to operate at a straight line of where we are today until 2050 and suddenly there's a drop. Nor that would we expect necessarily that there is a zero carbon emitting in 2050 or that there would be, just like Microsoft, there would be some kind of carbon capture and sequestration or carbon technologies that are out there but more fully employed. So those are the kinds of expectations and then the discussion also wove around the need to do a baseline because the goal for SD7 is pretty ambitious. It's not just the generation, but it's also all operations. So we're very happy I think everybody was in accord on that. And I'm just reporting out for everyone's understanding. There was some discussion about SD9 and SD4 last year. Power with Purpose emerged as having resilience as a driver, and resilience as a topic is certainly emerging nationally, not just at the operational level, but at a systems level. So not just enterprise level, but at a systems level as well. And trying to make some decisions about what resilience is. If it's going to drive heavy investments, certainly the board ought to be thinking about what is resilience, how do we measure it, and so forth. So where would that roll into an SD? So we didn't have any decisions, of course, but I think because of that context, because of the driver of resilience, it's certainly showing up in much of OPPD's narrative today, that the board members of the committee felt that either SD4 or SD9 is where that ought to be tackled. So I just invite other members of the board who weren't there to consider, to react to that. There was no clear direction on how it's gonna happen, but it certainly is of enough importance that it should be tackled, I think was the sense of the committee. And other members of the committee can react as well.
Let me start here. So, I think the resource planning SD9 that we have doesn't really capture what happened with Power with Purpose. And do we as a board really want to capture that somehow? Because resource planning isn't just what we've done previously in an IRP that's related to WAPA. Resource planning is more about how do we look ahead? What are we reporting to the NPA and should those kinds of things be brought to the board in a monitoring report? And how does the board drive public conversations about resource planning in the future so that we don't end up with some misunderstanding of what's appropriate for community engagement around resource planning. So my thought is that, and we talked about this in the summertime workshop, that SD9, we either need to maybe do away with it completely or revise it to more accurately reflect what our resource planning process is now and what the board really thinks is important for resource planning in the future. So that's kind of the direction I was thinking, because we don't wanna have to go through that whole thing that we went through with Power with Purpose last year. We want this to be more of a collaborative process, or speaking for myself, I guess, I'm thinking that it would be nice not to have to go through that intense of a conversation in the future if we have some guidance in an SD9 that would help us to avoid those kind of pitfalls. Maybe that would be a good place to go. So kind of what I was thinking with regards to SD9, and Rick provided some bullets that I think we could consider, but not set in stone, and I would just like to hear about from what the other directors were thinking, kind of bouncing off of our discussion last summer in the workshops.
Any other context from the other committee members before the three that weren't there chime in?
I think Janice and Rick did a good job of highlighting the balance between SD4 and 9 and how we understand the purpose of each of them and what those policies tell us it is that we're trying to get moving forward. That idea that SD9 either, well, we don't need it, and we can divide the individual components of resource planning out into other directives such as 4 and 7 and 13, or should it remain unified, and this is a specific location where resource planning is such a comprehensive and intense and specific activity that there should be a specific strategic directive that says, here are the things that we would expect and that the public should expect during a resource planning type of process. So didn't feel as though there was any kind of conclusion as this is definitely what needs to happen next, but the ongoing discussion that started last year in the workshop of how should we begin to reframe this so that we can have kind of clear policy understanding for what the board's engagement should be at that, in that type of process, how staff is going to be carrying things out, and to the customer owners, the public, what they should expect as those types of things come up, because this resource planning process is not the last time that we will go through this. There will certainly be more resource planning processes in the future. And how should we all understand our individual roles, and how the activities will be carried out? And I think that the conclusion was basically SD9 probably doesn't give enough clarification to what people should expect during this important endeavor.
I would just ask, there's some flexibility. I think resource planning, you know, if we didn't have the increased load that was coming on the system, and as we looked at what would be our alternatives with North Omaha units 1, 2, and 3 from a 2014 decision and 4 and 5, I think we would have had time to do a broad stakeholder input process and look at a variety of different alternatives around that. But because of the nature of what occurred, you know, we need some flexibility in that. I understand what the board's saying on the stakeholder process and would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. But if we had a customer that came in today and said, it's 500 megawatts, and by the way, they'll be here in 18 months, there are things that we would need to put in place to meet all the requirements that we need to meet. You don't have that time to begin to do that planning. So however that discussion occurs or however that is determined by the board and the strategic directives, just allow that flexibility for those kinds of situations for us to be able to address them, and don't cuff our hands to something that puts us in a bad position.
I think that's good input.
Agreed, and I think that one component there, the engagement process is one part of resource planning, but the idea that generation is one type of resource and demand management is one type of resource, and improved transmission and distribution or different interaction with Southwest Power Pool would all be different ways to solve that same that same situation. And so it doesn't, resource planning does not just mean how are we going to construct new resources to meet new load. There are other options that could be and should be considered. I think that's another component of something Rick has mentioned in the past, is how are we going to evaluate what different kind of fundamental strategies will be implemented and how, when we choose one, that decreases our ability to choose another in the future. I think that's something that in SD9, in a resource planning type of process, again, separate from what is required for the IRP from WAPA, something that we should kind of consider, how do we make those choices?
So I think these are good elements for an SD9 discussion that isn't going to finish today.
Yeah,
What I was merely trying to point out that resilience has different viewpoints, has different definitions, and it has risen to the level where I think the board does have a responsibility, honestly, to set some definitions and some metrics that can help us work with senior management. Now, you're on the committee as well. Did you have anything?
I don't have anything else to add. You guys
Okay,
covered
so-
it sufficiently.
Yeah, so Director Gay?
Well, as I was saying, the committee's gonna change and Director Boloff will be, so it's a process question, I guess. So if we do that, we're gonna look into the changes. I mean, probably is one of the things the committee will take on and we'll deal with maybe in the summer and have a broader discussion, but is it kind of on the agenda that we're all gonna look into this? Cause I think it would be yourself, myself, Director Williams and Director Kavanaugh make up the new committee. So when we deal with it.
So I would, what I was thinking was is that, as far as
Yeah,
process,
what do you wanna do?
the four of us that were in the room that day kind of had a consensus that SD9 needed some work. Today, we just wanted to gauge if there was interest from the rest of the board for that work, and if so, then we will proceed with that in the committee, most likely.
I will add something. I'm gonna retract that. So Mary, you've often said that what is this SD actually giving management the direction to do, right? And so I think that I look at these SDs as both inward facing that way, giving you direction, but then also communicating to the public what the expectations are of the board. And so maybe there's not action that would be different from your side, but to still have that outward facing public piece to say this is our expectation, that still needs to be upheld somewhere. So I think that was one of the things we also talked about last week, maybe not in the committee meeting, that may have been an afterthought. So, but yeah, that's the only thing I'll add here.
That's great. Director Kavanaugh, anything to add? I know you'll be on the committee, so you get an opportunity to dial in. My quick 2 cents, we identified a clear need back in August that said SD9 wasn't helping us, right? So that's water under the bridge, and it's a matter of what does it migrate to? That's one. And I think all the comments made today, both on the part of board and management, I think are really instructive for how we're gonna go that direction. And I think in terms of your point, Rick, with respect to resilience, no question, in my view, that we've gotta think about whether or not that gets incorporated. And whether that's 9 or 4, I don't know that I have a strong opinion, but that's something that I think we're looking for the committee to kick around and figure out what you're gonna do.
So to the point of transition, I won't be on systems anymore. I didn't mean to steal anybody's thunder about where assignments are gonna be, but I just wanted to thank everyone on the senior management team. It's been 3 years for me of working in systems and most recently as a chair, and nothing would happen out of systems. I mean, the board has the privilege of watching a great team at work, is really what happens. And so I just want to thank everybody for their contributions and engagement throughout that system. It's very helpful. Now, let's get on to the agenda for today and the action items. If we could start perhaps with EP Comstock.
Thank you, Director Yoder. So today we have an action item for our 2020 railroad crossing easement acquisitions. And so you may recall this is an annual action item that we have for, is authorizing us to use eminent domain in a few circumstances where we are trying to do work around railroad crossings. And we need to have access for our lines across those crossings. And so we have, as a reminder, master agreements with the larger railroads. And so we typically have that all outlined on how we're gonna approach that and what our rights are. These are really for smaller railroads, or if in a case where we're not coming to an agreement with the larger one, or they're not exercising according to our master agreement, that we could pursue it under eminent domain.
So as a reminder for the new board members, this is an annual exercise.
It is an annual.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think this will be on consent agenda. I think the intent is,
Hey, can I ask,
so if there's any.
question? Why do we do this annually? Why isn't it, we have the right to do this, why do we have to publicly state this every year? What's the purpose of that?
The board has to exercise the ability to exercise eminent domain.
Yeah.
In each case. And I think historically, management has just selected 1 year at a time as the way of doing it. It could go longer, but it seems like doing it on an annual basis works, but that's really up to the board, really.
It's a good question, Director Gay. What might be a reasonable time frame? Is that something that maybe the systems committee should take a look at?
I just throw it out there because it's one of the rights given to us, is that like all other public power, why we do this every year. I mean, cause it's rarely, I don't know how much you use it. It just seems like a process that.
Yeah, I think the reason why we do it on the annual basis, just to get to is that sometimes we need to act pretty quickly on certain situations. So we know we have that capability to do that, and that allows us to communicate that very clearly. I mean, if the board wanted to do it perpetually, forever, we would love to do that until it changes. And to have that capability to do that, but I think historically it gives the board the right to make that determination on an annual basis and not give up the power to vote on eminent domain.
So I think there's a spectrum there between annual and forever.
There certainly is.
I recommend 2 years, because this board does not change but every 2 years. And so if we voted on it positively last year, then
Yeah, I think that's a level of detail for systems, but go ahead.
Could we ask for maybe a list of the last times when something like this was necessary to be reviewed in systems and then consider a change like that?
It's about 6 times a year.
I'm sure we could get that. I'm not remembering the last time.
I'm sorry, if you're asking how many times on eminent domain, we do it about 6 times a year for these smaller ones. And again, we have the master agreements in place for the larger railroads.
Do we want systems committee to talk about that, or I guess
I just think it's a waste of time to do this, just give it perpetual, that's the laws, what the law is, why we even have to approve this, makes no sense, but I don't know, you make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, well, we can't make decisions here, but we can recommend that systems committee recommend that the systems committee look at.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, good point, Director Gay. Thank you for that.
Troy, Mr. Vai.
First contract here that we'll discuss, underground residential development, and since we like our acronyms, we call them URD here at OPPD, which is just subdivision expansions. And this is for a construction labor contract for new developments, not existing, but new. And it's good to point out this work is very fluid. It's driven each year by economy and customer needs, and so as we look at contracts around this, we look for flexibility to be able to ramp those contracts up and down as needed. Interesting point that I might want to point out, 2018 and 19, we saw that volume of work increase 40 to 46% over the 3-year previous average. And so we've been in this expansion period for a couple of years now in the Omaha area, so good things to report, but it drives a lot of work, and this helps us manage that work. And the construction labor includes installation of electrical infrastructure, so plowing, putting cable in, the underground equipment, the pad mounts, secondary pedestals, the smaller green boxes that you see around, And at least for 2020 here, around 1,000 streetlights will be added as part of those subdivisions as they're built out. Construction would begin in March of 2020. The way this is set up is a 3-year contract with the ability to extend 3 additional 1-year renewal options, so that gives us a lot of flexibility as we move forward. As far as the way this proposal was publicized, it was put on Omaha World Herald, and we sent out specific targeted invites to six different companies that we know perform this work. We received 3 proposals, and the proposals were quite wide, as far as the price differential between the 3. Fortunately, all 3 were technically and legally responsive, so that's a good thing. The proposal we received by Nielsen was deemed the lowest and best bid. I would say they have very intimate knowledge of our system. They know what the work likes. They've been the incumbent since 2016. They already have the workforce and the trucks and all the equipment ready. That's one of the things we keep finding as we go out. And, as you've noticed, when we go out and we purchase like the next contract equipment, pretty tight range of bids. The construction labor this year, last year, we see pretty wide responses just because of the demand that's in the market and the fact that many of these entities have to ramp up, so they have to go out and buy new trucks or get new workforce to be able to do the additional work. Nielsen's a local company here in Omaha. Continue to have really good relationships with them, and they currently do some other work for us. Recently, the board approved contracts for proactive cable replacements, and so they do some of that work for us too in the rural and metro area. The engineer's estimate was kind of fell in between, the lowest offer and the second. And what they did is they looked at past history of offers and used that to kind of gauge where their engineer's estimate should fall into place there. These contracts do have a index tied to them, so if you think about things that can change, I'm thinking about the next contract. There is a CPI index associated with this one. The next contract that I'll talk about has things on like copper and steel and things of that nature, and I was jumping forward. So with that, we have a recommendation based on legal, technical, and economic evaluations. Since this is the lowest and best bid, we're recommending that the board authorize approval of Nielsen Construction for the construction services to install the distribution system components in the URD developments.
Thank you, Mr. Valle. Any questions?
I've got maybe a question or a comment. This is when they go in on the new subdivisions, and Tim and I worked, I'm sure the others got calls from developers like, hey, why are we we need to speed it up. So this will help that, to get it, those developers will be a little happier, because you have your
happier. There's other things that come into play, right? So when you're working on the URDs, you have weather that comes into play that shifts things around, and you're trying to also coordinate your activities with other utilities and infrastructure that's coming in at the same point in time. So we currently use Nielsen for this work, and we can ramp it up and ramp it down as needed. So it does allow us that flexibility to add crews to some extent in short periods of time if we need to ramp things up.
That's adding we don't do any of this work ourselves, is that right?
We do some of it, and we actually do the final termination on site, after they install it. So just to be upfront though, I shared with you the expansion we've seen in the service territory. They have 15 to 20 employees at any given time working on URDs. So it's a substantial addition to the staff that we have.
Yeah.
Is the decision for underground, is that driven by code, or is that driven by developers' option? Or?
The developers usually select that.
And so we're happy with that though, because the long-term reliability is better, less exposure to no, yes, no?
Well, I mean, we'll actually touch a little bit of that in the SD4, but at a high level, underground's great for storms rolling through, it's hard in that fashion. When it does fail, it takes a while for you to replace it, so your customers can experience longer outage when there's a failure. If you think about what's going on with the growth of all the developments and then the amount of fiber that's going in underground, those underground facilities can sometimes be hit or somewhat frequently hit over the course of years. So there's pros and cons to overhead versus underground.
Thank you.
You mentioned there were 15 to 20 employees. Is that currently with Nielsen who's doing that?
Yes.
And then is there a reason that they are perpetually doing that work rather than us? I mean, how do we decide that that's something that we should contract rather than something that should be done by employees?
So we look at kind of the ebb and flow of work that comes into play. And so as I shared, we're 40% higher for a couple of years than we were previous years. And so the contracts allow us to not necessarily staff with peaks, but to be able to handle that flow of work. And so we have to compare what kind of things we're wanting to do within our system over the course of a year and what type of work is piling up. And then as we look at that, then we have to make decisions on whether we go out and contract versus utilize internal labor. And so for instance, I mean, we'll talk about this a little later, but the amount of system improvements that we have going on in 2019 and 20 are significant. And that has significant pull on the labor of our employees.
I think what we've done is identified there's a base level of our current underground construction employees that we feel during the ebbs and flows of economic upturns and downturns stays pretty constant. And so we've been pretty good about maintaining that workforce numbers over a period of time. And then these are kind of the peaks where all of a sudden, it'll run where you have a lot of apartments being built, and then pretty soon now you have a lot of residential developments being built because people are moving out of apartments into homes. And so you'll see this kind of trend. Typically what happens in the URD, they'll run, they'll have a lot of lots, and then pretty soon it'll slow down again because there's so many lots on the market. And so we've seen that in 2008, 2009, and 2012 and 13. So you see that kind of ebb and flow. We feel, at least Troy and the team feel pretty strongly that we have a core group of staff on the underground construction that meets kind of that day-to-day minimum requirement. And for us to staff up and down is probably not the way for us to handle peaks. So just like we don't necessarily staff for 100% of outage, whether it's at our power plants or whether it's at our distribution system, where we'll call in additional contractors to help support that. So we've kind of identified what we think that base level is.
And if you look at the economics around this contract, we're looking at around 1.6 million for 2020. Considering that's 15 to 20 crews, their trucks and everything else, that's a pretty reasonable contract for us to consider.
This will be on the consent agenda. Did you get your question answered?
You wanna take a shot at the wide range of proposals? Is it just unfamiliarity with the high end?
No, I kind of touched on that a little bit. So we don't have direct conversations with the bidders until after this, right?
So
But the other labor contracts that we've had recently, they've all been wide, every one of them. And that's because of the amount of work and pull that's taking place on craft workers in the United States right now. California alone is pulling a tremendous number of these workers, including arborists and tree trimming and all that activity out to the West Coast, because their PUCs are telling them basically cost cannot be an issue for you not to get this work done. And so it's almost a gold rush for this type of work taking place. And so if they don't have folks around who don't have assigned jobs, then they have to go out and get those individuals. They have to buy trucks if they don't have trucks, and trailers and equipment and things of that nature.
So I just have one additional question. Dr. Gay alluded to developers. Julie, does your team engage with developers with their satisfaction with these contracts?
Yes.
And how has this company compared to having our own people do it? Do we have any comparison of satisfaction with those?
I wouldn't say that we have a formal survey process on it, but our actually my team and Troy's team work very closely with the developers, and we have a monthly meeting, like a community meeting with the developers to get them all together in the same room to discuss kind of the scheduling concerns that Troy mentioned and would, you know, where we need to be putting our resources first. I don't think that they have a preference one way or the other for whether it's an OPPD crew or a contractor crew. They really just want the work done and the lots available on the market. And that's the information that we've gotten from them.
So when they do the work, then who goes and looks how good of quality they're doing of the work? I mean,
We have,
subcontracted out, how do we know they're
Yeah.
doing a quality
we have,
job?
we have employees that do inspection,
Oh, okay,
and
we
so that's part of it.
oversight.
I'd say it's probably more of a spot check than looking at every single
Yeah.
cable that's put in the ground. And as I mentioned, we have employees who actually do the termination. And so so what they do is when they go out to terminate, they look at the work that's being done, they're on the site quite a bit, so we have folks that take pictures, and sometimes I get pictures, or the field soups get pictures, and so we have a lot of eyes that tend to be on this activity. And just like with our own employees, sometimes there's rework that has to happen, and we try to make sure that we have a good product that'll last a long time.
It is interesting in the build cycle, you'll notice there's a couple peaks and valleys in that build cycle. Everyone's trying to get homes before the winter done and heated and ready to go, so there is a demand that's out there. And we try to, and we typically don't go in till after, I think, the water or gas. And we're kind of the last ones to go in to do those kind of connections. And it's never the front home that's being developed in a development, I'm being somewhat facetious, it's always the farthest one. So we have to get that and hook that into the network and make sure that that operates. But there is a bubble that occurs, and that is some of that tension with the builders, there's no doubt about that.
We've identified some things that help us, like when the job site's ready when we show up, we can actually get work done much quicker. So John and Steve Fanslaw have spent a lot of times, I think in all of our one-on-ones, I shared with you some of the slick sheets that we have for developers now that help them understand what should it look like when we show up on site to be able to do the work. And I think that's helping with that type of satisfaction too, because then we can kind of roll in and start doing the work. We don't have to try to reschedule and figure out when we're gonna fit those crews back in.
Good discussion. Thank you for that. This will be on consent, and let's learn about the transfer.
All right, this next item is for a contract to, for 69 to 13 8 kV transformers. It's a 1-year contract with the option to extend an additional 4 years in 1-year increments. It's a multi-year contract, so it provides, again, a lot of flexibility for us. Provides us certainty around costs and where we're gonna get this from if we need it. It supports system load growth, replacement projects, because as our transformers age, we have a process where we go and replace them. We also carry spares. This particular buy that we're looking for this year, so we have an additional spare on site for this type of activity. It's probably interesting, not necessarily tied to this contract, but our folks go out and we test transformers quite readily to inspect them. We take samples of the oil. We found that to be a really good test for how viable a transformer is, because there's gases that they test for inside of these, and so that usually gives us a pretty good indication of when something's getting ready to fail, and we can be proactive with it. Again, as I mentioned, this particular purchase for this year is for an additional spare. We have a portable spare that can be kind of driven around on a trailer, which is very helpful, and we have one additional permanent one. But we feel with as our infrastructure ages a little bit, having an additional one on site makes a lot of sense for us. 6 proposals were received. 2 were deemed legally non-responsive. They provided alternative terms. They were incorporating an existing contract that they had in place. I will say our supply chain group does a fantastic job of pointing requirements out ahead of time, so I'm always a little bit surprised that we continue to have have those type of incidents, but we do. 2 of the 6 were deemed to be technically responsive, which was WEG and Delta Star. So those were the 2 that we spent the most time really digging into and understanding. WEG was selected as the lowest and best bid. For some background, they were founded in 1961 as a supplier of electrical products. They're based out of Washington, Missouri, which is great for us. We like it when we can find a provider who's close, because these are large pieces of equipment, and shipping them can be somewhat arduous. We've purchased transformers specifically like this one from WEG before, had really good performance of those contractors, so we don't have concerns there. The engineer's estimate was pretty much spot on with the lower bids that we received. And as I started to speak of it earlier, there are escalation, de-escalation formula adjustments in this contract for copper, oil, steel, and accessories, and including labor. And so as things change over time, we know what those prices are. This is a really good option for us in that factor. So based on legal, technical, and economic evaluations, we're recommending that the board award this contract to WEG Transformers for the 69 to 13 kV transformer. This gives us the option for 4 additional 1-year terms if we choose to execute those in the future.
So
Question?
you said that WEG is a
Washington, Missouri.
okay.
And so, Troy, you mentioned there's a timeline on this, but it's for one specific piece of equipment. Can you help me understand it? So this is, we could get another one at the same price anytime during the timeline? I guess I'm not totally clear on the relationship between
Depends on the
number and time.
on the index that I talked about. So
Yeah.
over time, this is a 1 year with the ability to extend the contract later. So if we decide we wanted to get another one of these transformers next year or the year after, we would know what that cost would be and would be able to execute based upon that.
And so this action authorizes additional purchase of the same piece of equipment with the escalation in the future during the duration of the 4-year extended contract, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanna make sure I'm understanding what it is that we're.
That's a good clarification, because it's written as one transformer
Right.
in some of the language, but in the resolution, are we good with it there?
Yeah, would we be obligated if we would buy an additional transformer during this period of time? If we would choose to go with a different company?
Yeah.
Do we still have that flexibility? We're not obligated to go with those folks or not at all?
We could go with a different company.
Okay.
In this case, we have a set price, we have a company that we know has a good product and close to Nebraska, so the likelihood of us selecting another vendor, at least in the short term, would be pretty low.
Yeah.
Now, if this transformer that we're supposed to get later this year has issues and we can't work some things out, then that's when we go out and we look for other options.
Okay.
And Mr. Burke just made a comment here that you'd still come back to the board if you were buying another one.
I can.
You would still come back to the board if you buy a second or third one, is that correct?
These, I think they're usually.
Not if you bought it under this contract.
Okay.
But we would report it certainly.
Absolutely.
Well, we have contracts over.
We wouldn't ask for
Report it back.
Okay.
The value in doing this is that if we have a failure of this kind of transformer, we can save about 90 days in the procurement, bidding, evaluation process on an item that typically is a long-run item, so we can shrink that to have that replacement capability sooner in that regard with a pricing that we think is reasonable. If we think the market has dropped down on pricing, then we may go out, but this gives us the option to extend it. But we would report that out on what we purchased and the reason why we purchased it.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions on this?
The legal opinion indicates that the WEG proposal stated that it would only be valid through December 26, 2019, and then recommends that we receive a letter of clarification. Did we receive that letter of clarification?
That's an example where we will pick up items like that in the course of reviewing these proposals, and we do everything possible to keep everybody in play. rather than just say, well, too bad, you missed out on agreeing to the RFP, so we'll just send something out, and obviously they understand that, you know, they were supposed to have left it open so that the board could consider it, and they always maybe is too strong, but almost always would respond affirmatively, so.
Thank you.
Thank you also for the picture. Appreciate it. If there's no other questions, then if it's okay, let's move on to the report out on SD4.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am going to report out on SD4. I'm going to do the first half of this presentation and then turn it over to Troy Vi to do the second half of this presentation. As you can see, SD4 is about reliability of our system. It includes both generation and delivery, which is why we're tag teaming this today. I will start off with the generation side of the report. SD4 requires us to have generation and delivery systems that perform at a high level to provide reliable services to our customers. Energy delivery, energy production and marketing, as well as the nuclear business units of OPPD contribute to the reliable electric service of our customer owners. First requirement is OPPD shall assure all customer requirements are met through the use of its generating resources and purchase power portfolio 100% of the time. We do that through a number of different means, the first of which is our resource planning assessments. We talked a little bit about that earlier. We do resource planning at least annually to come up with what we need for the following year, and that's incorporated into our corporate operating plan. We do plan diligently for sufficient generation that will provide capacity and reliability both now and in the future. As part of that assessment, we do provide up to 112% of our expected peak load, which is the requirement through the Southwest Power Pool. As necessary, we do also work with our transmission and our marketing areas to ensure that we have transmission reservations in place for the delivery of energy, any energy that would be coming in from purchase power arrangements. Using the integrated marketplace really provides OPPD with that real-time access to liquid power markets. So if we happen to go into a forced outage, our friends in the marketing area, thank you Javier Fernandez, help the generation side of the house to make sure that we are continuing to meet our generation and our load as necessary. I'm happy to report that we have provided and between our owned and our purchased, as well as from our marketing friends, and supplied the requirements 100% of the time in 2019. Talk a little bit about generation reliability benchmarks. We start with FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC sets policy within the nation around not only energy delivery side, but they do also provide some guidance down to NERC, which is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, about how to look at our generating units. As part of that, they have what is called the GAD system, or the Generating Availability Data System. And that is a system that we are required to report the reliability information in about our generating units. This is a nationwide utilized data system. Every unit must provide this information in on this system. Anything that is over 20 megawatts or larger. So across the nation, all of the generating units do report into the GAD system. So our information that we talk about and that we show publicly all comes from the GAD system. The generation reliability metric that the Board of Directors has set forth for us in SD4 is the equivalent availability factor. And I'll just remind us a little bit about what that means. It's the percentage of time that a unit was available to generate over the total period of time. Outages and D-rates will impact this factor. If we have an outage or we have a D-rate, then obviously it was not 100% available over that period of time. the unit is available and capable of generating for full load the entire month, then its EAF would be 100%. And the EAF is megawatt weighted, and what we mean by that is it's weighted based on the SPP accredited capacity. And so each unit, as we look at a 3-year rolling average, which is what the board has set forth in ST4, they are weighted in terms of how we calculate what that percentage EAF is over both a 12-month period as well as the 3-year rolling average. And our target is to be top quartile on NERC GADS benchmarking. So we do use the information coming out of NERC GADS to be able to benchmark against other utilities and other units. Over 2019, this graph shows what our performance has been. In 2019, you might recall that we had a very large outage at Nebraska City 1. We continue to strive to meet this 90%, but due to the flood at Nebraska City Station as well as the extended turbine outage, we did not make this 90% factor in 2019. And the first year that we actually did make it was in 2018. It was the only year that we've made it since we put this in place in 2015. Currently, our 3-year performance for our units, or NC1, is at 84.6%. Nebraska City 2 is at 88.3%. North Omaha 4 is at 90%, so they're meeting their target. And North Omaha 5 is at 87.4%. So we continue to track and monitor these. Being in the top quartile is very difficult for any generating unit to be at. The difference between top quartile and second quartile is only 4 percentage points. So anything between 86 and 90 is considered second quartile. So it's a very small band between being in second quartile and being in top quartile.
Hey Mary, can we ask questions?
Yes.
Nothing you can do about a flood, I mean, that's gonna happen, but do you have all the tools you need if we didn't have that we can meet this goal? Like I say, I mean, we can't control that, and you did a great job, you and your team, with what we had to deal with. But we have all the tools in place, equipment, manpower and all that, right, to do this?
We are currently planning for floods both at Fort Calhoun and Nebraska City Station.
Yes.
We are staging materials, we're prepping for that. We're anticipating that we will have a flood this season as well in the springtime. So yes, we are putting plans in place to make sure that we can address floodwater should they come. Having said that, we may still have to shut down these units if the water gets up high enough to where it tops over the repaired levee. At that time, we'll have to look at it and assess it. So it still could have impacts on us.
Is it fair to say that the floods was the reason for the drop in 2000?
No, I think it's the combination between the outage being extended, and even if we had not had the flood, probably with the extended outage, we would not have made it, but the flood added to it.
Mary, this only accounts for generation above 20 megawatts, and so do we account for, or can we account for any distributed generation in the district that would kind of help us to meet this?
Not the GATS data.
But there's another,
not that I'm aware of.
okay, so we can't account for any distributed generation in the, like, I'm thinking about university, you know, cause they have their own generation facility.
This is our owned
Unless we have control.
generation that we report into the GATS system.
So it has to be higher than 20
20
megawatts,
megawatts.
and we have to have control over it.
Okay.
Yeah, again, these are based on the FERC and NERC rules.
Right.
So that's the basis of Mary's conversation.
Right, and that's the basis for the benchmarking as well. So they wanna have a common system where they can put all of the data in and they can look at all of the units, and we can look at all of the units to see what others are doing. If others are maintaining 90+% pretty regularly and going through their outages and maintaining that, those are people we wanna go benchmark and learn from. So it is a great tool for us to be utilizing.
Real quick, the EAF is affected by outages and D rates. Help me understand or remember what D rates would be. What activities affect a D rate or cause a D rate?
An example would be that we had a failure of a piece of equipment and we had to take the plant down to half load while we took that piece of equipment offline, repaired it, brought it back on and brought the unit back up. So that D rate of 50% for 2 to 3 days that it took us to repair would be a D rate.
Okay, as opposed to a full outage where the equipment's totally offline.
So it's whether or not we can repair something online, whether or not we have the material in place. We could take a D rate until we get the material and then take an outage. So lots of different factors there.
Thank you.
And would that also apply to things like wet fuel, like
Coal would also coal sometimes will cause us to take a D rate as well. So different factors, some of the others would be trimming and things that we can do to influence that would be trimming our emergent outage, so our planned outages, and our unplanned outages as much as possible. Solid reliability during the summer months. So one of the things that we're planning this spring is to make sure we do a tune-up on our units before we get into the summer months where we need them to run continuously. And so we do that each year at all of the units. We do use lean efforts to improve our reliability, and then we optimize the outage scope. Troy was talking a little bit about bringing in supplemental workers. We do that to get the outage work done as quickly and as efficiently as we can. And then just revising the length of our scheduled outages. How much do we really want to fit in? We need to be able to balance between our O&M costs and the cost of lost generation in the marketplace. So we always look at that. We work very hard every time we go into an outage with our marketing partners. And we do ask them specifically, is now the time to take a unit out, or should we wait a day or two based on what they see kind of going on in the marketplace at that time. So we work very, very closely with them to make sure that we're all on the same page with what's the best timing for an outage. Some of the things that we've seen in 2019 that have caused outages and D-rates, you can see here 67% are planned outages, which is good. We want them to be planned outages. We do not want them to be unplanned outages. To the extent that we can narrow down our unplanned outages, those are the things that we really focus on. What can we do? You can see in here the flood was 4%, but boiler leakages are 13%. There was a mill issue that was 1%. Turbine generator was 6%. Valve issues we had on the turbine generators were about 3%. Air heaters. So we have a variety of pieces of equipment that can and do contribute to the outages that we have and the forced outages that we have. This is where we focus a lot of our attention. How do we prevent these, and what are the actions that we can take to get better overall reliability in our power plants? So historically, boiler tube leaks or boiler failures have led to the cause of availability not only here but in the industry. When we started taking a look at this and tracking it, boiler outages were contributing somewhere between 5 to 7%. And I'll show you a little bit later that we've dropped that down significantly. We put a FACT team, or failure analysis and corrective action team, in place that actually monitors the performance of each and every one of our boilers to take the appropriate corrective actions. They proactively monitor the condition of the boiler components, and they prioritize the repair activities and they also recommend chemical cleanings and predict when capital investments should be required. We also look to our Generation Reliability Evaluation and Analysis team, or the GREAT team. That was formed in 2015, and they look at these non-boiler issues. And so they're looking at things like recommended actions for monitoring and appropriate progress towards improving reliability using operational practices, capital investments, maintenance. Currently, we establish system health reports, and we are establishing equipment criticality rankings in order to help us to assess these items.
a question about the boiler leaks?
I'm sorry?
I have a question about the boiler leaks.
Okay.
That's a pretty high number related to all the other ones. Is that related to the age of the plants, basically, and
And so what we've seen, a lot of the boiler leaks that you see represented up there are either coming from North Omaha or earlier in the year would be in Nebraska City 1. That was why we took Nebraska City 1 out and we did a boiler. We did quite a bit of upgrading to the boiler, or like for like replacement in the boiler, to mitigate that, because we were seeing the number of boiler tube failures increase dramatically over a period of time. And so as we replace that, then it brings the reliability of that unit back in line. We are now starting to see boiler tube leaks in Nebraska City 2. That was for the first time here in the last, 6 months or so, maybe longer than that. And so we're starting to see that about the 10-year time frame is when you would anticipate something like that. And that's right about now for Nebraska City 2. So this is not unexpected, but it does get to the length of time that it has been in service. We do have generation reliability programs. Our business unit is structured to focus on this, not only from a business unit perspective, but also in working with asset management and trying to bring an asset management strategy into our thinking. Some of the things that we look at in the systems approach to this would be things like preventative maintenance programs that would include vibration monitoring, oil sampling of our equipment, infrared thermography, motor testing program, ultrasonic testing, acoustic testing, and then long trending items of temperature and performance metrics, routine visual inspections, and then boiler chemistry analysis. So we do pay attention to all of that as we operate. We also have a root cause program where we take each one of these, we do in-service inspections, and then if we have a failure, we ensure that we improve our processes by doing root cause and understanding what has caused those failures so we can try to prevent them in the future. This was a slide that I was referring to earlier in terms of our boiler performance. You can see that back in the early, I think that's 1987, you can see that we were running 6 to 7% of the time when we were having boiler outages. We are taking that down to be somewhere in the 1 to 2%, and our goal here is to get it down to under 1%. So we are achieving our goal in terms of boiler performance through some of the programs that we put in place, as well as some of the replacements that we've been able to do over the course of time. Unless there are any other questions on the generation side, I'm going to turn it over to Troy to talk about energy delivery.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher.
All right, SAIDI, System Average Interruption Duration Index. That's the metric that the board has given us to measure how well our system's performing. And we have a goal of 90 minutes or less. And what that means is an OPPD customer on average would see approximately 1.5 hours of interruption during the course of a given year. And this particular level of 90 minutes is considered first quartile in the utility industry. So that's a pretty good number, and it also represents 98.98% availability. It's a good standard to be able to benchmark. Nearly all utilities use it. It's used in PUC filings and board report outs for public entities. 90, I think 90 was determined to be a good number because it really it sets that standard of top quartile, but allows you to really think about, are you gold plating your system or not? You know, how reliable do you want to be? And so it gives us a good measure for that. So on this particular slide, we met our goal for 2019. It was kind of touch and go there for a while. We weren't sure if we were going to meet it, but at the end of the year, as our plans for tree trimming and asset replacements have come into play, we were able to get that number down below 90 minutes. The far left chart there is the safety values on the left. The blue bar across the bottom is that first quartile, the green second. So unlike Mary's discussion on EAF, there's quite a gap between first and second quartile. This is a 3-year rolling average on the left-hand side. You can see in 2015, 16, 17, 18, we continued to kind of march up with average minutes. And then in 19, see a reduction down below 90 minutes. The single year, which is over here on your right, shows quite a lot of volatility. 2015, we were seeing about 60 minutes given year, and then jumping all the way up to 105 to 16, slightly below the third quarter or the first quartile line in 17, and back up again in 18. So we've seen some volatilities there, coming back down in 19 as our programs are really starting to bring some legs to us.
Were we tracking this metric prior to 2015 and we're only showing 5 years, or was this the first time that we began tracking this specific number?
No, we've been tracking it for a long time. We just show you a nice snapshot of how it's trending.
Right.
So before 2015, it would have been at that level or lower than the previous years before that. So we've seen a marching up of our outage minutes over the years. So here's our system performance, and so on the left-hand side you'll see outage minutes, and we march through the different years here, 2015 through 19, as far as what's driving outages on our system from a minutes standpoint. The green section there is trees, green for trees, and you can see in 2017 and 18 we saw an uptick in outages related to trees. In 19, the work that we've been doing has helped reduce that. The orange bar in there is weather, and weather can change from year to year. It's really important for us to kind of track that, weather-related outages, so those may be due to ice on our lines and high winds, things of that nature. Those type of outages fall into that bucket. And then we have two different sections here for equipment. We split them out purposely. We have the blue bars, which is basically all other equipment. Then the red, which is cable. Cable, we'll show this on the next slide, is really quite impactful to an outage minute standpoint. So we break it out, we analyze it specifically on its own merit to make sure that we have good programs in place to address changes we're seeing in that trend. So here's the slide with all of the equipment put in together. And we bucketed it in different groups, so you can see the underground, the minutes related to underground over the course of the year. 56% of the outages we're seeing are related to underground. Overhead, 26%. Transformers, 8. Substation equipment, relays, things of that nature, 6. And then 4% on transmission. Transmission a lot of times doesn't necessarily cause us to have customer outages because we can reroute. But in this case, it was 69 kV lines, mainly in kind of those rural areas. And we had the galloping issues with the ice forming on those lines, the winds causing those lines to dance and short out, and in some cases causing damage. So just kind of an interesting depiction. We talk about underground versus overhead quite a bit from a minute standpoint, and a large portion of that underground piece is really cable failures. And so how do we kind of address these? We have 4 different programs that helps us ensure that we have a reliable system. We have the vegetation management. So in 2018, we kicked off an initiative to kind of reevaluate our vegetation management program due to the increasing outage minutes. We had an additional $2 million a year annually, which is about 25% increase in that total spend that we have on veg management. And we're starting to see some really good reduction in outages related to trees. Specifically in 2019, we focused on those circuits that were having issues with reliability around trees. So we had a lot of targeting that took place. We have our second bucket here, which is probably our largest asset management bucket, Transmission Distribution Improvement Plan, otherwise called TDIP. And really what this does is allow us to focus on proactive replacement of aging equipment in our system. So underground cable replacements that we've discussed, we've really ramped that up. I've got a map that kind of shows where some of those took place in one of the next slides. Wood pole evaluation and replacement, so we inspect about 20,000 poles per year. We have roughly 220,000 in our service territory. When we go through that inspection, some of those are deemed to the point where we need to replace them. We get them on a schedule to get them replaced. The poles that are remaining, they're coated and, so that the longevity of those poles will continue for years to come. We've had some downtown network upgrades. So in 2017, we started a program that really focuses on our downtown network and vaults. And so what we do now is annually we inspect every single vault, and we visually inspect it, and we also use infrared cameras to look for hotspots and things of that nature. We've added some equipment that allows us to better see what kind of health are in those vaults. And so a lot of really good work to help improve the reliability of our downtown network. And so when we first started that program, as you can imagine, we found a lot of things that we needed to replace. Over the last year and a half, that's reduced quite significantly, so we know we're doing the right things in that location. We have a power quality group, which was recently moved under the asset management group. It used to be in engineering. And so what they look for is pocketed areas of issues where power quality may not be as good for some customers, and they find ways to target those. I have a slide later in the deck that points out some of those, and I'm sure you'll be aware of some of those areas because we've all had conversations about those over the course of the year. And then we have a system planning and expansion group which goes through and does all the modeling. They look for constraints that may be happening on the system. Some of that's due to customer growth, some of it may be due to changes in customer consumption, an individual adding irrigation or something of that nature. And so what they do is they look at that system and put the proactive plans in place to address it. Sarpy County Transmission Project is a good example of a large project that came out of there. And there's some additional items down in Rulo that we'll talk about in just a little bit that came out of that plan also.
Troy, when you, it seems like recently there's been a lot of incidents where vehicles are running into poles and knocking them down. Are we seeing an increase in that, and is that something we need to work with law enforcement about, or do you have some analysis of that, or what, is there a solution, or is it just distracted driving?
Yeah, I know we've looked at it. I think the last couple of years it's been pretty flat. I don't think it's increased too much there.
Okay.
But I will say, as we plan as a community, and our buildings get closer and closer to the roads, then so does the equipment. And so that's obviously that's an issue. And then distracted driving through cell phones is definitely something that
And they're increasing the speed limits on all these roadways. I mean, I would think that all of that would be a factor.
This is just a picture of what some of the trimming activities have looked like. You can see on the far left, trees all up in the primary, which causes issues. You can see on the right how the trimming took place. You can also see they've done a nice job. I mean, the individuals that do this work are arborists, so they know how to trim the trees and keep them alive and not cause damage. We've all seen pictures where, there's very large cuts taken out. This is a good example, especially if you look over here. You've got some of the main sections of the tree that are still intact. And so just a really good example of how they're managing that. And so probably something to mention here is trees can grow 3 to 6 to 7 foot over the course of a given year. And so having a program that we're continuously getting in and trimming makes a big difference, because we'd much rather cut a line or cut a branch that's the size of my pinky than one the size of a pumpkin. Because you can imagine it takes a lot more work and time to make that kind of effort.
Hey Troy, before you get off that vegetation management, put a lot of money into that. How long is that program gonna go on? Are we gonna continually keep funding at that level, do you think, or? mean, it's making an impact, it sounds like.
Right, it
What's the
is.
plan?
It's still early, right, so when we looked at the increase of the 2 million, we thought 5 to 6 years just to get back to a 5-year program, but we'll have to reassess as we go through that. I don't know that we'll need an additional 2 million in perpetuity, but probably something closer to 1 million over what we were doing historically would make sense. Because we just weren't spending enough to keep the
Fell
cycle.
behind.
So some of that'll depend on, you know, what do the contracts look like, what is the cost of the service, things of that nature.
And then one more thing with the growth of downtown, and glad to see with that underground boxes and all that, the downtown network upgrades. Probably a good thing with the growth that's happening down here. All the residential growth especially, so I know there's problems with that.
All mixed-use growth.
Fire, yeah, so that's a good.
Sorry, Troy, quick question on this. People take their trees very seriously. Could you just give me a quick high-level summary of what we do in terms of communication to people, the before and after vegetation management occurs?
So we have proactive outreaches, we work with our corporate comm group, work with the customer group when those take place. We have door hangers, we have folks who knock on the door and tell me I'm gonna be trimming a tree, and I'm with OPPD. So there's a lot of proactive steps that take place before folks actually start doing the work and getting into the yards. And generally speaking, you know, there's many times conversations are regarding, are you gonna kill my tree? You know, how do your folks know what they're doing? And so we're able to share, the individuals that we hire, the companies we hire are arborists. So they really know what they're doing, and have shown that they've done a pretty nice job over the years. And those individuals, those two companies, Wright and Aspen, spend a lot of time educating their workforce on how do they interact with customers. So, you know, we get notices through the board contacts of things that folks have concerns of, but we also get some positive feedback quite frequently on the interactions with these particular contractors. So really pleased with the way they interact with customers.
And I will say we're using new tactics and so forth, approaches in terms of neighborhood associations and to get proactive messaging out there, so.
Are we, is it the industry norm or are we kind of an exception that we provide this service at our cost for tree trimming?
Oh, this is definitely a norm.
It is a norm?
So generally, utilities are on a 3 to 4 to 5 year rotation of this. We've been on a 7 to 9. So, you know, we're trying to march towards 5. We're gonna reassess when we get to a 5 year rotation, what does our reliability look like? And then if we have to make adjustments at that point, we will. But yeah, it's as part of their programs. The utilities that have backed off on this, sooner or later have to come back and make some significant adjustments because their reliability suffers.
Well, I understand the need to take the initiative. I guess what I'm saying is it unusual to pass the cost along to the recipient?
So this cost doesn't go directly to that person's house.
No, I understand. I'm saying is that unusual or is that normal?
That would be normal practice, cost of service.
Troy, are we engaging like all these new housing developments, new subdivisions well, if they're underground cables, it wouldn't be as critical, but how are we addressing, like, what kinds of trees are being planted in our right of way and that kind of stuff? What kind of education are we doing in the community?
We have good educational material both on our website, and we have pamphlets that can be sent out. John and I believe Steve and that company have those conversations with developers as they're putting in the new subdivisions to make sure, hey, as you're growing this, think about this type of tree, this type of bush, this type of shrub, instead of ones that can grow, and think about the placement. Because at some point in time, we're gonna be in there cutting, and you know, what do you want your tree to look like? So there is a lot of conversation that takes place.
And from a community outreach in terms of around Arbor Day and Earth Day and those types of deal, when we're giving out trees and so forth, to say, is this the right type of tree in this right of way and so forth, so.
All right, so this is our high-tech view of the work that was done in 2019 around cable replacement. And you see 2020 goals on there. I just thought you might find it interesting since we are ramping that up. The dots aren't to scale. Over time, we hope to have a little nicer charts for you to see, but this at least gives you an idea of where the work is, and it's smattering all over our service territory. This is the proactive replacement that takes place. There's probably another 20 to 25 miles worth in any given year of failures that we replace also. In 2018, I believe we were just looking at around 46 miles total, ramped it up to 19, we'll continue to do that for 20.
Do you have a map like this for your over 90-minute outages that would tell us where they are located in the district?
Well, it would be a smattering, right, just like that. So every circuit's a little different, from year to year they'll look different. We do know that there's some constraints with some of our rural areas, and one of the slides I have here is going to talk about that a little bit. Metro, there's definitely pockets. Those pockets change about every year because we see something, we fix it, something else later, and so it's a consistent program.
If I may, just quickly, on the previous slide, you saw these in the corporate operating plan. This was certainly a topic of discussion, a lot of focus on the capital prioritization. The fact that we're increasing the amount of miles on cable replacement significantly from 2019 to 2020 is certainly reflected in the capital work that we put in. So representing the capital prioritization team, that was a big deal, a big discussion about how do we prioritize these type of work that eventually helps the reliability and resilience.
There. And so this is just a depiction of the new distribution poles put in place in 2019. So you can see about 2,000 poles added, replaced over the course of that year. So that's pretty significant for us. Smart technology, which is always a topic people are super interested in. We had a distribution automation pilot in North Omaha. We've had it in place for a couple of years. Roughly, that's around 42nd Fort, 2 square miles around that. So we selected that area because lots of trees, lots of motor equipment, and so what we've done is over the last 2 years been able to really kind of look and see how well that equipment is performing. In 2018, we saw a reduction in outage minutes of approximately 1.5 million for that particular location, so it was pretty significant. Now, if you remember, we had some weather late in the year around October in 2018 that caused trees to kind of lean over. And so this equipment helped us sectionalize different circuits and to reroute much quicker. So very good outcome. In 2019, we saw about 200,000 minutes saved, which is still pretty solid. As we move into 2020, we're going to test these even further in real locations, most of which will be targeting kind of that Saunders County area, and specifically North Bend, because you asked about a map. That's a location where we know we have some issues. We have really long circuits, and when you get into the metro, and so this allows you to sectionalize those. And here are some of the focus items. This is not an all-inclusive list for 2020. I have 19 and 20 on here because there's a lot of overlap. We start some of these in 19, they move into 20. You can see North Bend up there, distribution circuit proactive maintenance. So we've got some facilities we just need to replace, but we also are putting these smart devices on these locations. If I move down to Meade, Utan area, we've had some galloping issues in that location during the winter time, so we have some airflow spoilers, which we put on the lines, which will help help reduce the galloping. If you've seen some of the lines around town, it looked like there's a wire kind of wrapped around them. That's what the airflow spoilers look like. Rulo is a really good one. It's all the way down at the end of our service territory. Really had one single way for the power to get in. We're adding an additional 12-mile circuit to help add to that redundancy in that area. So that'll mean a big deal for the customers down in that location as far as when the storms come through. This will help give us another area to bring in a source of electricity for them. And then Miracle Hills and Pepperwood, we're all familiar with those locations that have had a lot of cable issues over the past couple of years. And in Miracle Hills, for instance, there's some overhead that we will be moving to underground where it makes sense, heavily treed areas, things of that nature. So a lot of good work focused this year and next year. As you can see, it's around the service territory. It's not just metro. There's a good attention to rural. And in fact, in 2020, our TDIP dollars are equally split between rural and metro work.
I think on that note, that's terrific, representing a rural district. We're happy to see that. But I'll also note that on that previous list of communities, that two of them, North Bend and Rulo, were in the top 10 communities designated by FEMA as being hardest hit by the floods. So certainly happy to see that kind of it was already planned, I know, but it's good to see work in those areas.
We've had folks, I think you may have seen the sharing that Steve Vance on some of our team members were out there at a public meeting out in North Bend talking about flood and implications of that. And we did some follow-up as well, just with some misperceptions of that we arbitrarily go and we disconnect, and that's not what we do. We wait for emergency management folks to give us that direction to disconnect in flood areas in the event that we need to. Julie, if you want to add anything else, or Troy, but.
I think you summarized it pretty well. The team did a good job of, I think, overcoming the misperceptions that were out there.
The Assistance Committee is in accord with this recommendation. Any other comments?
Regarding the smart technology and Northeast Omaha distribution, automation, and now the Northwest rural portion, it looks like testing here again. Can you help us understand what it means, the difference between testing or a pilot project and what this might mean as far as a more widespread rollout of this type of technology? And how do we balance what is pilot, how does that get carried forward to this is just standard that we are going to take something like this forward?
So the pilot in the north section was really pretty intense, where we had a lot of different types of equipment we were testing to understand what the pros and cons. We used a mesh communications, which we found had some limitations with trees. So as we go out to kind of rural areas, we'll be testing cellular a little more for those type of devices. And the reclosers specifically are the item that we found the most value from that pilot area, which is what will go out into those rural areas. So we just want to see what kind of reaction, how well they perform in those, and we're also going to be looking at some different providers of the technologies. So, testing 2 or 3 different providers to see how well each one of those types of products work. And so as we look at that, I would expect an expansion of specifically smart relays over the course of the next several years, because they give us a lot of ability to not only sectionalize the line, but when there is an issue, they help us focus on where do you send your folks. So if I have 20 miles of a circuit, instead of someone having to drive 20 miles to figure out where that break is, we know with more certainty which section that they should be focused on.
And then you are accounting for the number of minutes saved in that pilot project there. And looking back at the system performance drivers, I mean, I guess there's always a balance between you could invest as much money as you want and bring down the number, but this is the one that showed the greatest return on decrease in minutes of outages relative to dollars invested. I mean, and that's something you're gonna continue to track moving forward, so we can understand this is kind of what we're seeing as a return on our investment, because how much should we spend on new technology relative to 5 million minutes, 4 million minutes, whatever it is that we have.
So after we go through this, we'll have to perform business cases on it, right?
Yeah.
There is a cost, so now I have more equipment on my system that has to be maintained. And so many of these particular items have batteries on them that only last 3 to 4 years. So now if I have several thousand of them, I have to think about what does that mean from an asset management standpoint, what does that mean from a resource standpoint to be able to manage that additional equipment.
And is that something we would expect, kind of an individual report on this smart technology at systems sometime in the future, or how do we, I mean, is this just gonna be part of the SD4 annual report, or what are you looking at?
I think we're open, it'll take us time to test some of the new equipment, understand where we're headed there. We've got an initiative that's kind of laid out, system evaluation initiative. And so as we go down that path, we'll review not only the smart technology, but for other systems that it takes for us to kind of move towards where the customers are asking us to head. More information, better real-time information, reduced outages, things of that nature.
I would like to point out something that Troy mentioned earlier, the term gold plating, which is shared in the industry. And I think these type of data helps us do these really good analysis where you, at some point you reach decreasing marginal returns where you may not want to continue spending dollars, precious limited dollars on certain projects that have already reached their peak, where there might be other pockets in the system where we may be better off spending those dollars. But I think that information is flowing now in a way that is significantly better than it has in the past. And I think it's just the evolution of asset management and information management coming together that's allowing us to make those smart decisions. I'm really pleased by what I am seeing from the financial side on information, data, and how it all relates back to the asset management and ultimately to reliability.
Yeah, we've had a really quite focused endeavor over the past year to clean up our data, to make sure that it's usable and to use it in our business cases. So when we go to the RPC for approval of funds, we have to provide a pretty good business case to be able to do that. We're challenged because we're all searching for dollars.
But it's important, it's not only, excuse me, not only capital decisions, but also operating and maintenance. The conversations we have with senior management during the summer, a lot of this is done by operating and maintenance dollars, not necessarily by putting in new stuff. It's by vegetation management, it's by operating and maintaining the asset in the right way before we have to go out and replacing it or building a new asset. And I really appreciate that. I've seen the evolution of the conversation in the past 2.5 years that I've been here. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you've shown a very nice blend of, on that side of things, of predictive maintenance, inspections, as well as hardening the system, and we really appreciate the work that you've done. Mr. Gay?
Yeah, just a comment. I just wanted to comment, this is a great report, by the way, and thanks for all your efforts, but one thing I kind of recognize, it's pretty cool to see how they work together as a team to get that done, and all your employees as well. And if, that's a big deal. I mean, but anyway, I thought it was very intriguing how they all work together as a team so well and communicate. It's good to know and keep up the good work, so.
Thank you, Mr. Vai. Sensitive about time, but I don't want to preclude any other report, which we have with Ms. Fisher and the nuclear committee report. Nuclear oversight, so please go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to start with something that I skip over when I go into my data sheet reporting, that we continue to maintain cooling to our spent fuel pool. And that's critically important. And I know that we do it day in and day out, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge that, because as we're moving fuel in that pool, we're counting on that, with that chilling to be there through the water that's there and the cooling to be there. And so I didn't want to skip over that today. The second thing that I'd like to report is the movement of fuel from the spent fuel pool into the horizontal storage module, or the ISFSI, the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation, is going as planned. It is, if not on schedule, very close to being on schedule. And I'd like to report that we're at 50% complete as of yesterday. So that's moving quite well. We are also seeing improvement in the delivery of our canisters from the manufacturer, all that intense focus that we've had out there. They too are coming to the end of their program. And so we are seeing them to stepping up and getting more canisters available to us as we kind of speed up a little bit over the course of time here on how we're loading the fuel and moving it out. I think the last time we talked about that we were going from 1 a week to 3 every 2 weeks. And so we've been able to maintain that schedule. We're looking to pick up the week that we lost. We lost one during the flood, and then we lost one to mechanical error on the crane. So we picked up one of those 2 weeks. We're planning to pick up the other one here in February. Moving to the Independent Spent Fuel Storage Operations Facility, that is continuing on as well. We've had some winter challenges, as you might guess, in doing construction in the cold. But we did find enough warm days to actually pour the building floor. So the concrete is now in place. And so I would say, with the exception of the roof membrane, we are complete with the shell construction and are moving into the interior, so that's good news as well. And it remains on track to be complete and in service mid-2020, same time frame as when the fuel would be moved. So that those two projects need to come together in order to move to an ISFAC-only security plan. Just a little bit about other items that are going on up at the plant. Those are the major ones. One that we have been working on with Mark's team, and she's been doing a fabulous job. She assigned someone to take this on. And yesterday, Tim Ewing, the Senior Director of Decommissioning, and myself had an all-hands meeting. We do them once a month at all of the power plants, but the one yesterday, in particular, for Calhoun, we laid out our plans for layoffs this summer, as well as throughout the project. And so we went through department by department and told them what those numbers look like. It was a very quiet group, which was quite interesting, because usually they're pretty vocal. And afterwards, I asked the team, I asked at the meeting, why is it that you don't have any questions? And there were several people in the audience that said, well, we've heard it all before. So apparently we're doing our communications and it's getting through, and it was really, I think, a testament to the work that's being done up there, that they're being very transparent, open, there were no surprises. It was what people anticipated and what they expected. But Martin and her team have been putting together what this career transition project is gonna look like. And so we are gearing up for layoffs coming this summer sometime, as this project continues to move forward. And Mark, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, or?
No, we've talked about it before. I mean, we do take folks off site for the 2-month warn period that we have to give them, and give them an opportunity to be exposed to other companies that are looking for people, as well as resume preparation, interviewing skills, getting all of that together, and working with the Nebraska Department of Labor on their Rapid Start program. So they have an opportunity to try and find work before they leave the company, which is our goal.
And for employees who want to stay with the companies, are there opportunities for them to either transfer to another unit or work in security and some of our other?
We're continuing to focus on placing as many folks as we can. We have placed more than 100 folks from Fort Calhoun and other areas of the company over the course of the last several years, and we'll continue to focus on that as we're moving forward.
We continue to have them applying for open positions, and that's the way that they transfer in. There has to be an open position for them to go to.
Managerially, we've looked at retaining employees and maybe balancing that with our contract employees, is that?
So I'll tell you, we're having that conversation, a broader conversation with Kate on the broader security plan that we've laid out. And so as we begin to kind of roll that out, we'll try to incorporate all the pieces as best we can in that regard. And so because there'll be, there's always security needs at Fort Calhoun as we transition people out. There's still nuclear requirements on the security. And so how do we utilize those already skilled and trained people in the interim, what that looks like? So we don't have the solution yet, but we wanted to have a timely conversation with the folks to have them at least mentally prepare for a transition of some sort. These are not like jobs at all.
Right.
But how do we transition that in the best way?
So I don't wanna talk about security in public session, but at some point we'll get a briefing on what the plan is.
And we'll certainly, so that's a whole different legal and compliance conversation with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but I think we can give a broad, or Mary can do it on a one-on-one, and then maybe both of you can take Team Kate and Mary on Fort Calhoun security and broader OPPD security as we get to those kind of finalized plans.
Or in a committee meeting or something.
Yep.
Brief point there. I asked earlier about the increasing workload for the contract work that we had on the undergrounding, but if there's an ongoing need for a type of service that is currently contracted, I guess I'm just interested in how we make that decision about what is contracted versus what is employees. Increasing workload due to underground residential development relative to a type of service that we need all the time within our facilities. Seems like maybe there's a different evaluation. I'm interested to hear the discussion that we're having with Kate about how that determination is made.
So as we think about URDs, there is a difference, I think Tim mentioned this earlier, the function is different. And so the training involved is different. So you don't just necessarily go from a power plant or coal yard to installing power equipment, at a residence.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cross the different types of jobs, just that there are two different types of jobs where we are evaluating whether or not it should be contracted or employee. Not that the jobs have anything to do with each other, but that is one example where it does make sense, it sounds like it does make sense to have contracts. And in this example, just hearing the evaluation of how it makes sense to look at one type of security versus another type of security, which we've talked about a couple times over the past year.
I think some of the folks though are, so I think we've had some folks from Cole who's had interest in underground work and what do they need to do to be prepared for that. We've had some folks that are looking at project management because we have some retirements coming up, and so there are definitely some of those opportunities taking place. We've had several individuals out at some of our centers of late to kind of learn about what we do in those locations and even help on certain tasks. So there's a lot of action going on where folks are getting exposure to those different groups and can kind of.
Yeah, there's a member of my team that has specifically been assigned to work with some of these folks. So there are folks out at North Omaha Station in the coal handling group that we know are going to be displaced in the next few years. And she's meeting with them one-on-one and talking through what their interests are and how we can best prepare them for a transition. And so we're doing that as much as we possibly can with folks to try and help them.
And I will tell you, over the last couple of years, we've had several folks that I've talked to on the security side that are going back and getting their MIS degrees and the opportunity to transition into other parts of the organization. I think from our contracting piece, our intent is to have employees, OPPD, full-time equivalent employees at Fort Calhoun on the security as best we can in the future.
So our security plan, I talk in general about the security plan at Fort Calhoun. At Fort Calhoun, the numbers that we laid out yesterday, please don't hold me to these, it's just kind of what's in my head, is that through an MOU that we signed with the union, we placed all of the security officers by seniority into their positions, and so they know who they are. And then all of the officers that are left do know that they are the ones that would be laid off. And so they have the opportunity to look at other options for other jobs that are being posted anywhere around the district. And some of them have, as Tim is alluding to, have other degrees, have other skills, things that they would like to get into. So all of that is open to them. This layoff in particular is the majority of people that are going to be in this layoff are operations staff and security. Operations staff, many of them are going back to school as well and are getting differing degrees. I have several that are getting engineering degrees. So lots of activity, and I think what I see going on is they really are taking hold of their career, planning what their next steps are, working their way towards that. The other thing that we're doing is we're taking the knowledge and the expertise out of the operations side and using that and placing it well within the rest of the decommissioning organization that will be left. So that is not necessarily going away, but at this point in time, those are the two largest groups that we have on site that will be downsized. The majority of the downsizing will come from those two groups. That might be helpful in this conversation.
That is helpful to me. I think there's a struggle, and I just want to convey the value that I have for providing the support for existing employees to stay within the organization as the organization is transitioning. Certainly we have a need for transitioning skill sets. I heard, and I haven't gone back to the source of this stat, but I've heard it from two different sources I trust. We have a recent employee that came from the State Department of Labor and then one of the faculty members that works in supply chain, both talked about within the workforce age in the United States, if everybody was employed, we'd still have 2 million jobs that go unfilled. So if we have valuable employees, what can we do to help them? Because we're gonna need valuable employees. So I appreciate the work you're doing. It's not easy at the hands-on level to go from that big statistic and broad brush, but I do appreciate the fact that you're working towards it.
Yeah, that being said, I totally agree, but, and I do appreciate we've done a really good job. I mean, because that was a commitment we made when we decided to shut, Fort Calhoun down, and I think we've lived up to that as best we can and be continuing to do that. And I'm glad to hear everyone's on the same page with that. But anyway, it's a challenge, but I appreciate you keep focusing on that. Good job.
A couple of other things, we're ready to move on. I wanted to talk a little bit about what our next steps are. We've been talking about moving fuel. We're also planning for our next steps, so two things I wanted to mention in particular. The first was we're going through building by building, and we're creating a category called Ready for Demolition. And so we're preparing these buildings by throwing the water out of them, making sure that there are no hazardous materials in them, cutting off the power. And then we're turning them over to Energy Solutions to help us plan the demolition of those facilities. So that's kind of a next big evolution. We're also looking at, when you go through the decommissioning, part of what you want to do is you package up all of your waste and you ship it off to, whatever landfill it's going to. Radioactive waste will go to Clive, Utah. Clean waste go to landfill. And so you want to package that and make sure that it's being transported properly. As we looked at the site and we looked at the floodplain at the site, we had considerable concerns about, where were we gonna do this? Where did we have enough laydown area that we could get up and out of the floodplain? And so we've selected an area up and out of the floodplain where we will go in and we will make some changes and modifications to the site. So the next time you come to the site, you might see some changes off to the one side or the other. And what we're doing there is we are actually going to put in an additional rail spur. And that will allow us to put up a rail spur going to a temporary structure that we're going to use to do this packaging going forward for the next 4 to 5 years. So you might see that happening as well over the course of the summer. Last but certainly not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about our quality assurance program and what our quality assurance program has been up to. They continue to visit our manufacturer in Greensboro, North Carolina, TN Americas. And as I said, they're picking up their pace and they're really working. But again, they're out there this week. So we continue to focus on that and make sure that that's going well. And then the NOS department did do an audit on fitness for duty, access authorization, emergency preparedness, and security. And out of that, they found 2 findings, 2 deficiencies, and 4 enhancements. And that concludes my report.
We have a question. When we get to the point of the fuel being done, are we gonna do anything like let the public know? Or, cause that's a big deal. You don't need to get into it
We're
now.
capturing it all the way along
Oh.
the journey and so forth.
I mean, I think
so-
that would be a nice,
Yeah.
obviously you do too, then that'll be good to let people know where we're at, cause that's a big deal.
So Mary, what, you talked about packaging different components when you're doing deconstruction. Is there a segment of that can be repurposed or recycled? And do those go in a separate pile?
We do. We look at all of that. It will be separated and segregated to the point that we can. Our first and foremost is to make sure that nothing is radioactive. So we will do all of that first, and then we will look at what's left over and are there things that we can do to help with the recycling.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the report. That is our report from the systems.
Okay, it's time for lunch. I assume it's out there, right? So we'll break for lunch. We're gonna take 30 minutes, so we will reconvene at 12:30.
this right now.
That's not fun. That's instead of E.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
Wow.
What are the chances?
you're back.
That's
I got my tea. Got my chicken noodle soup, I'm ready to go.
right.
So we're gonna go to the PI committee. I'm still the chair of that for now, so I'm gonna I'll lead from here. Just real quick before we get into the legislative update, we did, there were 2 items on the PI committee's agenda, which we held our meeting on Friday. And we had 2 very brief updates that I'll just provide to you as the same update. 2 things that are kind of in motion right now. One is per our discussion about BL9, which again stemmed from the August workshop as a potential place for revision. The decision was made to have a first version of the legislative resolution drafted. Senior management has been extraordinarily busy doing other things, which we'll get an update on here. So per our conversation last month, we're expecting a first draft of that in the second quarter. The other item that was a quick update is the role of directors in outreach. Again, I won't review the full discussion from last month. The action items, the next steps there, the first was our legal counsel, Mr. Bruckner, putting together kind of a black and white list. Here's what is appropriate, here's what's not, and that would come back to the board for review. And then eventual discussion on our approach and what kind of guidelines and direction we could give to ourselves, I suppose, with respect to what our role is in the outreach, what the director's role is in outreach as we go forward. So those are 2 quick updates. There was no discussion on those. There was a healthy amount of discussion on the legislative update, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa, to kick this off.
Thank you, Chairman Moody. Yes, it was a robust conversation because we did cover, for the hour and a half, we covered the state legislative agenda and all the moving parts. In fact, even right while we were sitting here, within the last couple hours, some of the positions have changed and so forth in language in some of the bills. So we'll give an update on that. And then we did do a deep dive into federal. And with the direction of the committee and chair, we went ahead and provided that entire deck for the board members, but then did a condensed version of that for their requests. So with that, Mr. O'Brien.
Thanks, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, excuse me. I'm gonna jump in and do our state and federal.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, it has been.
It's gonna be a long night too, so.
There we go. I'm gonna start first with the state update. This was the same slides that were provided to the Public Information Committee. And just to ground you a little bit, I wanna talk about where we're at in the legislative calendar, as this is helpful as we start to see bills being moving forward. So we're in that middle of February time. So all bills have been introduced to date. And so we're continuing to review and understand the impacts on the district. Also, hearings are happening of new bills that are introduced. And another important piece is the designation of priority for a bill by the speaker. Each senator has their own ability to prioritize a bill or committee. Really what that means, it helps signal what bills would likely be moving to be heard on the legislative floor and debated. So that's important to really understand the landscape of the legislature through this month. And then we continue debate through March, and the end of the day is planned for April 23rd of the 60-day session. This is very similar to last month's update. We're actually in day 22. This was, again, the same slides that were used on Friday with the Public Information Committee. There's more than 500 new bills that were introduced this session. Our team has been analyzing about 75. We've been looking at many more of those, but I want to thank many folks across the district that are helping be a subject matter expert to review those particular bills. So there's a lot of work going on, reviewing, understanding, watching positions, seeing how things may move. There are a lot of topics related to our energy or our industry. I won't go through all of those. Many of those will arise on the handful of bills that the Public Information Committee directed us to focus some of our time on today. But those are many of the things that we're working on and continuing to monitor. So looking at some of the priority bills, we're gonna spend some time really focused on an update on 5 bills that warranted some discussion from the Public Information Committee, and then 1 legislative resolution. And I'll read what those bills are so you've got a little bit of a preview, and then if there's questions on the next 4 slides that I have on some of our priority bills, I'm happy to take those. The first that we'll talk a little bit more in detail is LB 933. This changes provisions related to the disconnection of utility service. We'll then talk about 1205, which is adopting the Renewable Energy Standards Act. Then LB 1132, which may change provisions to net metering. And then legislative resolution 294, a review of various climate-related findings and acknowledgement of anthropogenic climate and ecology crisis. We'll talk about LB 720, adopt the Imagine Nebraska Act. And then LB 627 that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So those are the bills that over the next handful of slides I'll talk a little bit more in detail of. The first one on this particular slide, actually I don't have any, I'll jump to the next one, but I do want to pause if there's any questions or comment on these particular bills. Seeing none, I'll go to the next. We'll spend most of our time on this slide actually. So the first bill is LB 933. And this was introduced by Senator Crawford. The hearing is on Thursday. There's actually some changes to the bill. Seth just delivered them to me a couple hours ago. So it's a little different than what we talked about on Friday, but I think the moves have been positive. So we think it's a bill that has been helpful and collaborative with Senator Crawford, Julie Comstock and her team and Seth. That's been a great deal of time giving thoughts and feedback to the senator as she prepares this proposal. So the bill does about 3 things, and I'll highlight those. One is, if you've heard of Linda's Law, it's from New Jersey around disconnects of folks that have medical needs for critical needs or needing electric service to maintain that. There was discussion of the disconnect period being from 30 to 60 days. The bill has 60 days. We believe there'll be an amendment that will move it to 30 days, which is what it currently is. We think that's the right time, so we appreciate that the senator listening to some of the industry concerns there. The other is relating to costs for reconnection. And so we talked about this a little bit Friday and got some clarity around it. And this is actually for all disconnects, not just medical related disconnects. And so the way the language reads is that the utility must not charge a fee that exceeds reasonable costs. And so we feel that our method and process, we charge reasonable costs for disconnect. I think sometimes the challenges from customers is there's the disconnect or the reconnect charge. I think it's $75, Julie, and there might be past billing amounts due, and so that can be some confusion of actually what the customer's attributing to what their reconnection cost might be. So that's those particular items. We're going to provide a letter of support to the committee and senator on this bill for the hearing on Thursday.
So since Friday, that's gonna move from monitor to support.
That's terrific. You have my support for that support.
Thank you. The next bill to talk a little bit further on is LB 1132. The title is changes provisions related to net metering. There's a lot in this particular bill. If you read the bill, it doesn't align to net metering as we might think about it, related to solar or batteries or other distributed energy resources. It actually has a lot of details around all generation. Essentially, it defines what that can look like, but even fossil or other types of generation connecting to the system. And so we spent a lot of time with subject matter experts, and Steve Bruckner also helping from a legal perspective looking at this. The industry is continuing to look at what their position will be. I think most people are looking to be opposed the way the bill has been written today. We believe there'll be an interim study to continue to further look at the topic of net metering and then continue to educate the committee that this bill's in, and then as we're continuing to look at our journey of our rate strategy. But there's a variety of things, a couple highlights of some concerns. There's some mention of private generation connects allowed to be connected to the system. So currently, private generation that can connect to the system is only renewables, from a bill passed from probably 4 or 5 years ago, 824 related to renewable energy. There's no mention of how reliability or system concerns might be managed with some ability to connect large generators. So if you read the bill, it has different tranches. I forgot what the first one is, but I think it jumps to 2 megawatts, then 5 megawatts, and then there's kind of an endless cap. And so even a 5 or 2 megawatt connection to the system could cause challenges for us and our customers. And so we have some process questions about how that could even work. There's some other things about duplication of services that we found unclear, and then how pricing would be set forth. So there was a lot of questions we had around this particular bill. We think that there could be some stronger policy around net metering and some of the things that we're working towards. So that's some of the highlights on that particular bill.
So the recommendation from senior management to the public information was that we are going to oppose this bill as written.
Thank you, Lisa. The next one is LB 1205. This one we've had a lot of discussion as well. This is from Senator McAllister. The hearing is on Thursday. We're in a position of opposed as it's written. We provided some feedback to the senator actually over the holidays on this particular bill. It's really interesting when you start to dig in about renewable portfolio standards across the country. There's this big move to clean energy standards or directives, just like SD7 that the board has implemented, and we're moving in that direction. That was one of the big feedbacks we provided to the senator, is take a look at our strong move in that position. The other is uncertainty, and so as we're in this decarbonization pathway study, we're not sure where things will be, and that study will help better inform us what the future looks like. And so those were a couple of the big items that were challenging to us in the review and looking at the policy. There were some also technical things about most RPS standards, renewable portfolio standards, are around megawatt hours. This bill talks about capacity or generation, and so just the ability to meet what's laid out in the bill had some question for us. I also did some research over the weekend, and as I mentioned, many are moving to clean energy standards. The last round of statewide renewable portfolio standards was about 10 years ago in the 2004 to 2008 timeframe. There's only been one enacted since then, and so I just found that data point interesting as again, the industry is moving towards the clean energy standard. We also had some questions about continued system safety and reliability as we looked at that particular proposal. So,
And cost.
and
There was no
cost,
mention
correct.
of cost.
Yeah.
And it needed a further definition of generation, so just some cleanup.
Yep.
In that regard.
So we're happy to engage the senator and the committee with feedback on that, but that's the position as we are today.
So as a utility with a specific objective and ongoing planning and preparation for clean energy use in the future, have we talked with other utilities who don't yet have those kinds of objectives or standards in place, and how they feel about what types of statewide policy might help them to look toward setting longer term goals and moving in the same direction? I mean, if this isn't the mechanism that would be best to kind of push forward for those who haven't yet taken steps, I mean, has anybody got any ideas about how they might be doing that in the future, or?
Yeah, you bet, Director Williams. I don't know that I can answer specifically to that. What I can say, and Lisa and Tim can maybe feed in a little bit on, the Nebraska Power Association is continuing to look at this topic and how we talk about it. So I can't get into the specifics of what other utilities are doing that. I can say a lot of utilities are watching what we're doing. I think they're very much leading the way in a lot of regards in these areas.
I think the other piece is what type of utility. This is one of the beauties of public power, where you have elected board of directors who are also the regulatory and the rate making body. So having that model in the state of Nebraska is advantageous, where the 8 of you get to set that policy and you get to support it through your rate making actions. I think where it gets really interesting is in the IOU side, where you may have competing interests. And I would probably look at those models where state or federal legislation could be providing guidance to better align both the the shareholder report view versus the PUC view. But it's one where I believe that our model is significantly better position for this type of discussion.
And I guess the question is mostly specifically in Nebraska, if we are already in front of what might be required by some type of a statewide legislation, how would we potentially engage with NPA or with other utilities if there was a bill that would force them to move forward? I mean, is that something that we would agree not to support because other utilities would not want that, something that is more advanced than they are at, or how
I
are we
will
gonna?
give you my discussion with Senator McCollister. I sent him SD7 very specifically and said, because the conversation we had is that, hey, I'm thinking about a renewable portfolio standard. I said, listen, here's what we're seeing as this clean energy standard, but I'm gonna send you what our board approved on SD7. That should be the legislative piece that you begin to engage with. Don't tell us how, don't give us any other kinds of mandates that will force bad decisions for a number of different reasons, but if you do that, we'll support it. And so I know that conversation is carried back onto him about, listen, if you say net zero carbon by 2050, then boom, we're on to support it, and we made that commitment early that we would do that. So.
And as we talked in PI, that we are going to submit a letter outlining SD7 and all of the work and just exactly what President Burke said.
Great, thank you for the clarification.
You bet.
Great. I have one to add on the 2020 legislation. The other is, it's a legislative resolution. It's legislative resolution 294 around talking about the review of various climate findings and acknowledgement of climate and ecological crisis. This was introduced by Senator Kowalski. A little bit of background about legislative resolutions. They're kind of a unique animal, I guess I would describe it, in the legislature. They can do a lot of things. They can, they're often used to make a formal expression of opinion, intent or recognition. They can also be used to amend the state or federal constitution. And then where they're also used quite frequently is the authorization of a study on an issue during the interim, so once the legislature concludes. So they can range from everything from a high school winning the high school football tournament or the state tournament to an interim study or something just like this. So there's a broad range around that. And so as what we understand, this resolution came with some of the directive from the Prairie Hill Learning Center and the students there, and working with Senator Kowalski to kind of learn about the legislative process, which I think is pretty cool. So we talked about this on Friday, and we're going to provide some feedback to the committee about the work that we're doing similarly as our prior discussion on around SD7 and decarbonization, to talk about how we're moving in that direction as it relates to this legislative resolution.
I'm very glad to hear that, and I'm supportive particularly of young people who are trying to make a statement about what they'd like to see in the future, as well as engaging in the legislative process. I hope that we can be as supportive as possible, because this is non-binding, it doesn't require any change of policy for us, it just states basically the scientific factual information and says that there is a statement of values that we should take action. And those are coming out from more and more places all the time. The Engineering News report last month, Engineering News Record, the cover story was about a call to action for engineers on climate change. And the pull-out quote that they specifically used was from the leader of a national engineering company who said that the effects, what we're doing is compounding the effects on the poor. Adaptation without reduction of carbon emissions is immoral and it's stupid. It's a quote. And so even the civil engineering profession is starting to say, we recognize we need more action here. And that doesn't prescribe what should be done, but it does give a pretty clear indication that these are the values that we would encourage people who are professionals in our field to take. I think this is similar to sending a message about what we would like to see from people in our state. And so I appreciate that we'll share what we're doing, and I hope that we can be supportive of others taking action as well.
Thanks, Jake.
Well, I will tell you, we're changing the dialogue in the state, and so I think the work that the board did on SD7 to kind of lay that foundational vision is just changing the dialogue, and I know it's doing it at the other utilities too. Each utility has their own unique characteristics. You know, those that are in the retail where they do have a very distinct kind of accountability to their ratepayers have a different kind of perspective than those that may be wholesale. It's to kind of work with those wholesale customers to kind of begin to think about what this future looks like. And so I know there's a lot of work going on, certainly with those utilities to understand what that looks like and how they're communicating with wholesale and retail customers. So I would say that conversation is picking up steam as we speak today, so.
And as we talked in the pre-committee the last couple times at the direction of the committee is, we are gonna, after the session, looking at various resolutions and so forth and policies and so forth, and bringing back a draft for PI to take a look at.
A draft.
Of the resolution and policies and so forth. We just wanted to get through the session.
OPPD
Yes.
policy, yeah.
From a process perspective, do we expect this will get to a vote, yes, no, at the legislature?
For LR 294, it's unique to have a hearing often on these. I don't know about that. They might think, it's really not a vehicle that moves out for debate. And so I think it's seemingly more for an education standpoint for the students and then for folks that have signed on to the legislative resolution to share their thoughts.
Thank you.
Does Senator Hughes have to push it out to the floor, or because he's the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, because it was referred to the committee?
Yep.
So does he have to push it out to the floor before it will be considered? No?
I believe so.
Okay.
Sorry, this one's just a little unique, so
Yeah.
we might follow up on as we learn.
The last time,
The plan is, he's gonna have a hearing on it because of the kids coming in to do that.
Okay.
And then they're not gonna do anything yet. No vote or anything.
and the last time OPPD engaged in any LR was over 10 years ago.
Okay.
You said we're doing a letter on it, is that right?
Yes.
Thanks for the discussion. There's two bills here on what we call the 2019 holdover legislation, so it's legislation that didn't move completely through the legislative process last year that have interest to us, so I'm gonna speak about LB 720 and then LB 627. Actually, I'm gonna start about LB 627 first and LB 720 is on the next page. LB 627, it's by Senator Prancy Brooks. It's a carryover bill around to prohibit the discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Last night, there was actually a story on KMTV about this, and this bill's continued to get some momentum. So last year, it went for about 3 hours of debate, and so it stopped until the sponsoring senator can really essentially prove to the speaker that there's enough votes to move it forward. So it kind of stayed in that position until this year. And so just recently, the State Chamber of Commerce signed on to support the bill, and we think that gave it some more momentum, and more discussion around this topic. So we expect it to likely come back for debate sometime here in the 60-day session. It's something we supported. The Omaha City Council passed a similar structure a couple of years ago on the topic, and so that's currently where the bill is. We expect it to, again, likely be up for continued debate.
So then it gets committee hearings again?
It is,
What would the process be when you say it comes back?
it won't go back to committee, so I think it just goes right back to the floor, and they'll continue the debate where they were from last year.
And remind me how we engaged in it last year, did we do a letter, we spoke?
We've let the senator know we support the topic. I don't know.
Last year we did a letter, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll revisit that again.
Okay. I'm gonna echo support for this. Connecting it to 720 has merits for economic development, no question about it, but as Rick talked about earlier, one of our biggest challenges as a state is attraction and retention. And the lack of a bill at the state level is a hindrance to that. So I'm glad that we're engaging and I really appreciate that.
One last on this one is LB 720. This is the update to the state tax incentive program called the Imagine Nebraska Act. There was a hearing last Thursday on an amendment to the bill. The amendment added a couple things to it. I'll talk about three things. One, it corrected some of the technical items related to the bill. The second is it made a tier for small manufacturers. That was a concern across the state of Nebraska for them to be able to qualify for the incentive package program. The other is that it created a structure really around a retention structure for large businesses that might have been merged or the potential to merge. Some examples of that are Sydney, Cabela's in Sydney, ConAgra, the Schwab combination with TD Ameritrade. So to give us a tool to give some credit to the company that's here or merging to ensure that they have a financial incentive as they're continuing to make their merger or acquisition decisions. And so those were the three parts of that particular amendment. And then later in the day, it was discussed LB 1084, and that's the funding for the large UNMC project. And so there's a lot of discussion around does LB 720 move with LB 1084, and then also property taxes. And so all those things to come together. There is a cost to these items or potential cost to these items. And so we won't see them moving for a little bit in the legislature. I think it's day 45, I think, where debate can start if there's a cost to them. So somewhere in the next few weeks, we'll see these start to move with the likelihood as a package. That concludes what I have prepared from the state perspective. Is there any questions or comments? Okay, moving on. Okay, we'll jump into federal. Great timing, there actually is a lot happening in Washington, and we want to highlight a few things for you today. Just a reminder of what our team does from a legislative side in Washington, touch on the forecast that we expect to happen this year. And then there's a couple proposals that just came out in the last 10 days or so. We want to make sure that the board is aware of. So that's our plan today. We work in three primary areas from a policy perspective. One is, I would say the traditional things you would think about as monitoring and reviewing policy, federal policy. The other is we engage with agencies and regulations. And so that's where we work very closely with many different parts of the organization. We work very closely with Mary's group, for example, Chloe's group, or some of the things with FERC or NERC or some of those kinds of things. We work very closely. And then we do a lot of education and coalition building, and I'll talk about that on this next slide. So we have great partnerships with the Public Power Association, the large Public Power Council, and the Nuclear Energy Institute. So all of these entities, we have our folks working on various committees, we attend their events. They're really who help give us a first cut of policy. So for example, I'm going to talk about the Clean Act here in a couple slides. It's 622 pages. LPPC and APPA help us understand that first cut of where we should look, where we should focus, and they've been great partners from that perspective. And so very, very active, and we highlighted some of the subcommittees that were very active, focused on from each of those different entities. So we'll jump in here on what's going on in Washington. This is an election year, so it makes things all kinds of interesting. Seth looked, I think, on Thursday, there's 9,000 bills in the House and Senate, so that a ton of things going on. We spend a lot of time analyzing, educating, and watching, and so we'll get calls about, hey, did you know about this? Did you think about this policy? And just trying to figure out what items are going to move. And so in subsequent slides, I'll talk to you about a couple items that we think will start moving this year. But there's lots of bills on infrastructure, oversight, there's climate change. We're really focusing on 9 bills around climate change, for example. Lots of environmental things, and there's a whole catch-all, a lot of work on cybersecurity, security, disaster response has been another one that's been raised up, so we've been taking a keen eye on that. So those are some of the terms that we keep in our Google alerts and through all of the other things that we're doing to track policy. So I want to talk about some of the specifics. This one was frankly exciting to see from somebody that loves policy. I think Seth and I were super excited to see this big proposal. It was released on the 28th of January. It's called, in short, the Clean Future Act, but it is a big, big, broad sweeping proposal from the House, touching everything from power to transportation, all kinds of different things in there. We're reviewing it, we're looking at it. There's a really good summary, if you want a 15-page summary. The committee put a brief out on that, so if you want to see that, I think we've sent it to hopefully the board of directors to take a look at. But a few things I wanna highlight. We think this will be the vehicle that will move right before elections. So as we're reading and understanding, we think that the House's intent is at least to move this or similar proposal right before the elections. So there's a lot in it for us that we're trying to understand. One of the biggest that I found just interesting is that there's no carbon tax cited in the policy as it's drafted today. There's other things in it, like working towards our SD7 goals of 100% by 2050. That was one of the first items in the bill. There's also a piece for state plans, so each state would then need to develop a plan for reaching net zero by 2050. There's some things around financing, so there's setting up a nonprofit national climate bank for loans for new technology development. There's a few directives on how FERC looks at a variety of things that they oversee, so there's quite a bit there. The other piece that I flagged and Seth flagged is there's some items on coal ash and storage that we're taking a look at as well. So there's a lot in this bill. It'll be something we'll continue to engage the committee on. Seth was at an event over the weekend for the Large Public Power Council, again, talking about this particular policy. So with it being just a couple weeks old, we're trying to figure out what do we need to understand, what do we need to influence, what do we need to educate. So this one is really the vehicle we see moving on this big topic.
And Tim, one of the things that we discussed in PI was that this has bipartisan support, right? Or at least tell us about.
From a House perspective, and so it is, Seth might help me a little bit, but we see it moving from the House right before elections, likely. And then the Senate version is another story based on how elections happen. But there's a lot of pieces on both sides from this particular proposal. And so it's gonna be interesting to watch as it unfolds. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer, but the next few weeks we'll continue to update everyone on how we see it moving.
Thank you.
This is my last slide from a federal update perspective. So similarly to the Clean Bill or the Clean Act being positioned, there's a lot of discussion on the transportation framework, and transportation bills generally get passed. And so the first one that I have there is the moving forward framework, and this is from the House side. There's a whole bunch of things in this particular bill, as you can see I tagged there, but there's a lot on renewable energy, EVs, grid stability, etc. There's also a good summary that the House committee put out on this topic. The challenge is the estimated cost of this is, I think, $760 billion. And then the Senate version that came out, I think, middle of summer is like 287. And so there's a little difference there. So there'll be negotiation for those items to move forward. So we're taking a keen interest on where those things fall through. But generally, some aspects of the transportation package will move through. Just not sure what that'll all look like. The other item coming up is the green energy tax bill, and so the framework of this will be out in March. There'll be some things in here that'll help pay for some of the moving forward framework, and it may include some things. Right now, there's a vehicle tax credit if manufacturers manufacture under, I believe, 600,000 vehicles. That may be extended. That's some of the conversation in this particular proposal. There's also a lot of discussion about the investment tax credits and in what various ways they might be expanded. And so that's another thing that we're taking a keen eye on. We'll get to see what that looks like in March. We'll probably start hearing a little bit more what that looks like in the coming weeks, and we'll keep you informed on that one.
Is there any discussion in any of these bills about giving credit to nuclear power as a cleaner resource? Or for any of these tax incentives or any other kinds of incentives?
I believe there is. I was reading something last night about some of the current nuclear items, but I off the top of my head I can't give you some specifics, but we can follow up on what that looks like. Certainly that part of the industry is continuing to lobby for adding those parts.
Seth,
I didn't hear it, on the nuclear incentives, you said?
is nuclear being included in any of these green infrastructure or green energy bills?
It is on some, and the nuclear industry is also pushing for a production tax credit for existing facilities to keep the reactors that are out there still going.
Right.
So there's a whole slew of things they're looking at on the federal side, but also trying to get subsidies on the state side to make sure when they're in an organized market that has a capacity market, that their prices are above what the price is that they're getting, so they can keep them going so they don't have to shut down. So they're working a lot on how to get these things done. With the clean energy standards, it helps put them in there since they aren't carbon.
There still sounded like there was no solution to the disposal of the waste, right? I believe that was
No,
kind of-
and President Trump also said that he zeroed out the budget for Yucca Mountain. So he's siding with Nevada on that now. But what that's going to end up doing is pushing more innovation probably toward interim storage, which would be just as good for us anyway.
Probably happen quicker if it goes to interim storage.
But we have now nothing considered interim storage.
No, they're talking about monitored returnable storage that would be open to the industry.
Good questions. The last part I have here is we're tracking the various carbon tax proposals. I believe there's 9 that we're really keeping a keen eye on those as well. That concludes my federal report. The thing I did want to mention is that our bill tracker is part of the committee packet, and so that's posted online if anyone has questions about things that we're taking a look at.
I'll add something, Tim, I apologize, I didn't check in with you earlier. In addition to everything that Tim said, I think it's important for us to keep an eye on tax exemption. It hasn't gone away, I don't think it will ever go away. Whenever you're seeing these large dollar amounts for all of these bills, again, the tax exemption conversation continues, and we'll continue to be very active at the LPPC and APPA. We'll continue to be tracking that with the hopes that at some point, not only can we maintain tax exemption for municipal debt, but also bring back advanced refunding for bonds. We're looking very closely at sequestration issues. If the government continues to close down or sequester our payments that we receive for Build America bonds and these type of tax credit bonds that we issued a few years ago will continue to go down. We're trying to monitor that. It's boring financial stuff, but it's at the end that it's what may end up helping fund some of these bills, and so we're very closely keeping track of it.
And we're very close to that, not only for us, but on tax exempt bonds, which include public infrastructure, which includes some electrification, which includes schools, which includes STEM and tech programs for workforce. I mean, it's all those kinds of pieces that we're paying attention to as well on that topic specifically.
That concludes the report. Okay, thank you. Thanks to the team for all the hard work that they're doing. I know it's a busy time of the year.
Appreciate it. Thank you for being so responsive because we do ping you a lot as things are moving, so.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is I think, the pace is gonna continue. As the new chair, I'm sure you'll get a flavor for it really quickly. But again, thanks to the team for all the work that they're doing. Okay, we're gonna roll on to governance. Director Kavanaugh.
Okay, the governance committee met on Friday, February 7th. We discussed 4 different items, including the 2 items that are on the agenda for today that are both action items for Thursday. The other 2 items that deal with the recently completed board governance assessment report we did here recently, and then also on GP4 concerning the agenda plan. Scott, would you want to maybe give a brief summation on those last 2 items that aren't the action items?
Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to the board annual governance assessment, as you know that there was some feedback that was provided through the course of a survey. The intention is to have a closed session discussion next month to kind of review and talk about that information in more detail. And then I think a high-level briefing coming from that out broadly. The second topic was GP4 agenda planning. One of the things as you think about the new committees being formed without giving anything away. But there's also people that will be stepping into chairing committees for the first time. And one of the things we discussed was with regards to certain policies, it may be helpful for us to come up with some type of a like a one-page guideline for what that role of committee chair is and how to work with the organization around that. And the second thing is to have a conversation about that next month as well, and it would be an agenda item more broadly to talk about how the committee structure works. So, thank you.
The two action items we have, first one is the standing committee membership assignments. As you're aware, the chairman has certainly the discretion to appoint and the responsibility to appoint members to each of the committees, including the chair. And why don't I turn it over to Craig, and he'll kind of, you've all been advised what committees you're going to be on, I'm sure. And if Craig, you want to kind of add to a little bit
Yeah,
how you arrived at these decisions and so forth?
Yep, thank you, Director Kavanaugh. The only thing that I would add is just a little bit of context for how I tried to approach it, which is to say there were a few things that kind of guided the decision making. One was all of your preferences, right? Most of you provided some preferences for which committees you wanted to be on. Obviously, there were some positions that were set in stone. As the treasurer, you're the chair of the finance committee. And I am, based on our bylaws, required to also be on the finance committee. So there were some things that were just kind of set in stone before we really could even have a discussion about where it would be. I checked in with Tim and his team as well for some guidance on this. And the other things that I really tried to do, and this is per Director McGuire's guidance a month or so ago, was to think about how we can have some sense of continuity on the committees. I really didn't want to have full turnover to the extent possible. So I think in every case, there are at least two people who were on the committee before who are going to stay on, and then two new people coming in. The other thing that I was thinking through was, to the extent possible, getting some of our three new directors experience on a committee that they hadn't already had experience on before. So it was a big puzzle-making exercise. I regret that I wasn't able to meet everyone's wishes in terms of which committees you wanted to be on, but there was just more demand than supply in some cases. And so I think I'm excited about the committees, and that's at least the framework and decision-making that I went through.
Okay. And we'll be voting on that on Thursday, and I truly would be amazed if it didn't pass. I don't know what we'd do. We wouldn't have any committees, or what would, we're back to the drawing board, I don't know.
That's right.
But in any event, our other item that we need to take action on Thursday deals with SD1, the annual review and checking to see if we're in compliance with that directive. And again, Scott, can I turn it over to you? Great.
Thank you, and good afternoon. SD1, if you remember from last year, is really kind of the umbrella over all of our policies. It includes our mission, everything that we do, and our vision, where we're striving to go, and our values, in terms of how we show up in terms of behavior. It's an interesting monitoring report because it really, again, is trying to summarize everything that has taken place in OPPD over the past year that's relevant to our mission, vision, and values. One of the ways we take a look at this overall to ask the question, are we sufficiently in compliance, is the scorecard. This scorecard mostly reflects the metrics that show up within each of the SDs. I say mostly because SD 7 right now, we started the year off 2019 with these two metrics, percentage renewables and carbon intensity on this scorecard. We felt just in terms of a clean snap, it made sense to finish the year with those. So as we step into 2020, there'll be a change to that reflecting the change in SD 7, but it did feel like a clean way of finishing the year. And as you can see on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these, that the performance is really on target. And as you know from other monitoring reports, with regards to employee relations, we finished close for showing improving performance. With regards to safety, that's the really highest standard we can have. We probably will never be satisfied until we have 0.0. And then with regards to customer satisfaction, you can see, and you're aware of that SD5 monitoring report. What we'll do is move forward talking about each of these subcomponents, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more detail as we need to in the supplements. So how do we look at this, again, how are we in compliant? Well, over the course of the year, including SD1 last year, you all reviewed, just like you did today, SD monitoring report. I timed SD4 today, I think we were at 45 minutes or so. And if you do the quick math, that's well over 10 hours, like 10 to 12 hours spent having conversations around everything we're about to go through. So there is a real rigor that goes into this. Out of all those policies, 14 were sufficiently in compliance, and one policy you had indicated we're taking reasonable and appropriate measures to comply with this policy. The policy, as I've mentioned, includes our mission, and when we break that down, a first component is affordable. What I intend to do, because there's so many bullets here, is just acknowledge one of the policies the policy that associates with that particular attribute, and then just ask if there are any questions or if there's anything that senior team would like to highlight with regards to the highlights versus going through an individual review. I think that'll accelerate and make efficient this overall review. So when it comes to affordable, one of the things that we look at is SD2 rates. In the monitoring report, there is a discussion of affordability. Javier includes information that provides that. And in June 20th, 2019, the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance. Javier, is there anything that you want to highlight with regards to 2019 highlights? Yes, no, we're good?
All in there.
Any questions from the board with regards to this?
It's all good, it's very good. I struggle, as everybody knows, with metrics and context and the rest. And so having a number there is good, but it's nice to have it in the context of trends or what other utilities are doing as an opportunity for improvement in future reports.
On the SD1 or on the SD2?
On the highlights, the bullets that I see here.
All right, thanks. Anything else on this?
So just to follow up on that, so an example would be, we would probably share on some of these bullets what we shared in the SD2.
Right.
Right, some of that metric trending, that's what you, to carry that over into, I'm just seeking clarity here.
Sure, the clarity, third major bullet, we have 42.5 million to the decommissioning and benefits reserve account. I'm sorry, as a board member, I don't remember what the total account number is and well, I mean, increasing is, oh, gotcha, so I read that wrong. Bad example. Next bullet, significantly improve, what amount is that?
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, and then the last bullet, how much in bill credits to how many people, how does that compare to others in the industry, or how does that compare to how we've done in the past?
Gotcha.
Just, it fills it out for me.
Yeah, so.
And my intention is to go into a lot more detail in a few months when I present the SD2 monitoring report.
Terrific.
That's what I was gonna say, is I think, the challenge with SD1 is that it's everything pulled together.
Right.
So when we get into each subsequent one, I think you'll get that itch scratched a little bit better.
Okay, cool.
Good. Reliable. And again, here on December 13 of 2018, but hopefully on Thursday, the board will find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with regards to this policy. Mary Troy, anything from the highlights that you wanted to surface? And are there any questions from the board? Environmentally sensitive, on September 12th of 2019, the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with this. Mary or Lisa, is there anything that you wanted to highlight from the 2019 highlights?
Nope.
Or any questions from the board? With regards to our vision, strengthen the public power advantage of affordable and reliable electricity. When we took a look across this statement, we really felt that SD2, SD4, and SD5 are good bellwethers, if you will, with regards to how we're doing on this. Julie, Troy, Mary, Javier, anything to talk about from 2019? Are there any questions from the board with regards to rates, reliability, or customer satisfaction?
I'm sorry. No, I have none there, but I had a sidebar here that precluded me from saying something on the previous slide.
Sorry, that wasn't intentional either.
Not saying it was, right there. No, there you go. So, love the fact that we're installing new EV charging stations. I just want to observe, where I work, that we have some EV charging stations that are not being maintained. So it's not just a matter of installing, it's making sure that they are maintained and operational over time. Perhaps as an opportunity for OPPD as an energy services company. Just throwing that out there.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
On this slide regarding the strengthen the public power advantage, I guess does this cover the idea of, we talked earlier about a legislative bill that would allow for private generation. I mean, is this kind of the area where we evaluate whether or not we are doing enough to protect public power relative to other things going on, or is that, am I off base?
No, that would be a good component of the discussion here. We're doing enough, yes.
And I don't, I mean, I guess I've mentioned this before, I don't know how to analyze whether you have any comments about how we are engaging in defending public power and highlighting that, as APPA says, 13% cheaper, higher reliability in similar circumstances. I mean, are we doing what's necessary to make that clear? Because I guess it's the second time we've seen a bill that was kind of explicitly in support of allowing private generation.
Right.
Any comments or thoughts about how this?
I guess I would lead with some comments, and I'd turn it over to Lisa and Tim and potentially Javier. And when I think about your question, I think about a few things. One is our presence on APPA and our presence on LPPC, and a very active involvement in both of those groups. And that was alluded to earlier by Tim, and I think that also then creates a strong advocacy because it creates a weight of advocacy from a legislative perspective. And then the other thing, I think in terms of all of our marketing and materials that are pulled together, it's a constant component of it. So I would really turn to Lisa and to Tim for that from a communications as well as an industry leadership perspective. And I say Javier as well because Javier and Tim just came back from the LPPC.
I'll just give kind of a broad piece of this. I think the public power advantage is for us to execute very clearly on our SDs, right? Very clearly and specifically on this piece around affordability, reliability, environmental sensitivity, and us leading in many of those categories I think are really, really important with that. I think the other side of this is I think we're gonna see increased competition around private engagement around public power, just as technologies become to be more distributed. And so the work that Troy did several years ago that now is kind of moving to Julie's group and some of the other discussions we're having as a senior team to begin to think about a broader kind of service delivery is gonna be important for us to stay engaged with. And whether that's on the distributed energy resources or other kinds of technologies or resiliency that are being built in to certain businesses and organizations, I think it's gonna be important for us to continue that kind of extension of our relationship to our customers. It's gonna be really important for us to do that. So, and when we don't, others will fill that gap very clearly. And just by the nature of where that technology is going, it will challenge public power in a number of different ways. So we gotta be very astute in kind of our direction and the work that we need to do.
Question, thank you. Any other questions or comments, feedback? Exemplify fiscal, social, and environmental responsibility to optimize value to our customer owners. Here we aligned SD3, access to credit markets, SD7, again, environmental stewardship, and SD9 as evidence of this particular bullet. Any comments from senior team on this? Or questions from the board? Proactively engage and communicate with our stakeholders. Again, SD 13, and the board did review this November 14th of 2019, finding OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance. 2019 highlights, any comments, Lisa, on any of those, or questions from the board? act transparently and with accountability for the best interest of our customer owners. SD10 ethics seems to align with this transparency as well as the highlights you see here. On September 12th, 2019, the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance. Is there anything you'd like to highlight, Mart, or any questions from the board? Collaborate when appropriate with partners. SD11, economic development, I think we've had a lot of conversations over the past year regarding our activities here. On October 17th, the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance. Any questions, comments? And finally, leverage OPPD's leadership to achieve these goals. In this case, there's a variety, 5 policies that really feel like they align with this particular point. Safety, employee relations or engagement, ethics, information management and security, and then enterprise risk management, as well as the highlights below. Any questions or comments? So this was reviewed with the governance committee, and the governance committee did suggest that they would accept this and finding OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance. Are there any concerns? Good news, we're aligned with our mission, we're heading towards vision, and we're engaging in alignment with our values, that's good. Thank you.
As far as this going into, we vote,
Consent agenda.
Consent agenda.
We do this all again at the end of the year, because that was what it was.
Yeah, we'll revisit that.
It was our report.
Okay, great, thank you, Director Kavanaugh. We are on to other business. This is the power with purpose update.
She's gonna do the slides for me?
Oh, it's up here. What did you want?
This is another one of these where we have collaborated, and so Lisa Olson is gonna help me do this at the tail end. I'll turn it over to her and she'll play my
And you're gonna
my
run the
peanut butter
slides,
over
there you go.
So it's my pleasure to bring to you the update on where we are with Power with Purpose. In January, the progress that we've made on our solar is the bids were due back in on January 29th. We received 40 proposals. And the team is currently evaluating those proposals, so we are on track with the bids coming in on the solar RFP that we had issued. Next steps here in the month of February as we review those proposals, we'll get a lot of input from our economic and transmission models. Once we kind of pare those down, we'll be able to put those in there and make sure that they're bringing back the attributes that we want. So this is not us deciding necessarily by just looking at the proposals, but looking at the proposals and then running them through the models as well. So we'll be doing that in February. We will evaluate what the infrastructure expansion needs are associated with the potential sites. And then we will also issue the energy storage request for information proposal out to the industry to see what information we can get back on energy storage as we want to move forward with that. In March, we'll continue to do the modeling. We will also do a detailed technical and financial review of high potential solar proposals. And then we'll begin drafting a generator interconnect application for any owned generation facilities, should those be in the mix at the end of this in the March timeframe. Any questions on where we're headed with solar?
The energy storage RFI, is that a big picture RFI or is that the RFI related to the grant that we got for our battery storage?
So thank you for the question. They are two separate items. However, we're going out to gather information on the battery RFI to be able to select the technology that we would use for the grant. So the grant was put in last fall. And there is to be a meeting on April 2nd to officially determine whether or not we get awarded grant funds. And then the information that we get back on this RFI will help inform us as to how we want to move forward with what we hopefully do with the grant money. So the two are interconnected but separate. Any other questions on solar? Okay, I'll move to the gas. In January, we did go out for our owner's engineer bid. We did evaluate that. We have selected an owner's engineer, but we are not ready to announce that publicly yet, who that might be. We did have gas generation technology vendor workshops, so all of those have been completed. We invited the vendors in to tell us what their newest and latest technology is and what advances they've made and how they might fit into what we want to do. And then we also issued a natural gas supply request for information, so we're waiting for those responses to come back in. So in February, we will onboard the gas owner's engineer. We will be able to announce that at the March meeting, so we're planning on doing that. We evaluated budgetary estimates both on the economic and we provided input to updated We gave input to the budgetary estimates for the economic and transmission model, so we're updating those as we go, getting ready for these bids to come in. We evaluated infrastructure expansion needs for potential sites. We began to write the gas generation asset RFP that will go out later this year. And we will begin to evaluate the gas supply request for information responses as they come in later this month. In March, we also will conduct technical and financial review of the high potential gas generation sites. Remember, the solar and the gas have to come together in April so that we can get those generation interconnection applications in. And then we will continue to develop the gas generation assets RFP and the evaluation of the natural gas supply line options as we receive that information later this month. Questions on that? Okay.
I'm sorry, Mary, on the timeline there, I guess I was unclear, there would be an RFI on gas followed later by an RFP, but this timeline that you've outlined still puts us on schedule for the additional timelines that we have looking farther into the future?
Yes, we are still on track with our timelines. I don't see anything right now that is going to be a problem. The team is working very hard to maintain this schedule. And you know, at this point, unless we run into issues with the modeling piece of this, I don't see anything, and I'll look back over here to phone a friend, but I think they're on track.
Yes, and just to add further clarity, the RFP is for the generation assets. The RFI is for the natural gas supply.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about stakeholder outreach.
Thank you, Mary. Well, this has been a district-wide effort, and it's been all hands on deck, and many of the people in this room have given a lot of time and collaboration, so thank you for everybody on that. So in my update, I'm gonna always go back to where have we been, where are we at now, and where are we gonna go in the future. So as you all know, in October, we did the extensive analysis, and in November, you voted to move forward on our RFP process in that regard. Solar RFPs were due January 29th, so that was just a few weeks ago in that regard. And just wanted to stress again, at this time, no locations have been decided upon, so until we can go through the extensive analysis as well. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with that. With that being said, though, we still want to go out and engage our stakeholders, and that means all across the district. We want to do basically a listening tour, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and what that would look like. And at this point, the goal is to educate, answer any questions for the public they may have, and to conduct a listening tour to understand what's going on in the communities and so forth, and maybe from an economic development standpoint, what's important to them, workforce development, really basically have a conversation in that regard at the first stage. Mary, next slide, please. So this is a high-level timeline, and I'll get into specifics a little bit more on the approach in that regard, but wanted to keep this timeline in front of you so that you understand. As Mary said, we're on schedule as of right now, and we will keep you posted if anything tends to change in that regard. So, Mary, next slide. Thank you. So, the team does a lot of outreach as it is right now, but like I said, we want to go out on a listening tour. And some of the topics, and the team's working on this right now, is, giving an update on Power with Purpose, the why, again, of why we were going down this path. Some of our strategic initiatives, which could include decarbonization. And I know Director Williams, we will be clear in regards to what was Power with Purpose and because we're just starting this journey on decarbonization and what that process would look like. So there's a lot more to work through that. Give an update on EVs, battery, and maybe even updates on our Sarpy transmission project and community events, outreach, and volunteerism. We have really upped our game in a lot of the communities across our 13 counties and have been recognized for that. And then, of course, economic development and workforce development. What's happening in our areas and so forth. So phase 1 is going to be a broad communication, listening, and education tour. Phase 2 then was, once we get more specifics and so forth, we'll go back out and talk through the potentially impacted stakeholder conversation and updates in particular areas within the service territory once we have more clarity around that. And then phase 3 really will be engagement with directly impacted landowners and interested community leaders and so forth. And I'll talk a little bit more some of the specific approaches on the next slide with that. I'll pause here. Any questions? Okay, thanks. Outreach approach. There are a lot of tools that we have in our toolkit, and I will say the team has done a great job of benchmarking and saying, how can we be the best at what we can be? So we're going to be engaging in a new platform. It's called Bang the Table. It's from Australia in that regard, but it truly is a platform that communities can have conversations about a wide array of topics and so forth. So we'll be just doing this on our first component of it, and then especially during the decarbonization. I think this platform is going to be beautiful because it's going to be able to show the videos, where we're at on the specific projects and so forth, the interactions that we're having, and that will all be transparent. So right now, all of that, and Lori can attest to this, it's all manual. And it is, it's a heavy lift for the team, so I'm proud that the company is going to invest in a platform that will help automate this. And it will be more than just OPPD from a community standpoint. Of course, our websites, outlets, social media, Jody and the team will be doing media interviews all the way along. We have really increased our speakers bureau and outreach in that regard, going out and talking to individuals, and then community events and so forth, of finding out where should we be in our communities, and then engaging in the power panel and so forth. And then one of the items that we've been doing over the last 2 years is one-on-one coffee in these communities with the CEO, just sitting around the table and talking and having an informal conversation, because what you may find in one county may be different in another county. So one size does not fit all, and we're really excited about that. So this is just the very beginning stages. You will get updates, and the public will get updates all the way along of how they can engage, when they can engage, and we'll come back and report out like we've done with the Sarpy transmission projects and some of the other ones of what we've heard.
Right, in some of the outreach, we've talked about with decarbonization in particular, we received some comments about kind of specific things, probably more detailed than we need at this point, but things that people had expressed as an interest in that work. I think that Rick had brought up previously the idea of, asking people what they want relative to providing some technical information that people might not know they want. Specific example, we have very few people who ask for on-bill financing because most people probably don't know what on-bill financing is. And so I guess the balance of asking what people might want from the utility versus understanding that we as a monopoly provider make the market and can provide something to them. I'm very interested in how we're gonna, kind of proactively recognize this is a tool that can only be provided by essentially one type of provider, either the utility, either us or MUD, but how are we gonna kind of proactively recognize this is something people might not know they want, but could be an advantage to them, to us collectively? And so even if it doesn't come out of an input survey, how are we gonna look at some of those things that we can recognize internally might be beneficial if we don't hear that in a top 10 prioritization list from the public?
So this is where Julie and our teams collaborate as well because of the strategic initiative on customer engagement and so forth and satisfaction and so forth. So there's gonna be more to come in that conversation and so forth. We just have to talk through power with purpose and decarbonization and what that structure would look like, and then go into what is it that they truly want. One of the other items on decarbonization, what we have found from the team talking through is, even like with community solar, the same definitions weren't even aligned. So making sure that we can get alignment on that so that we can have those discussions.
Yeah, Director Williams, I think as we get, there's as we've talked, as I've talked to the board on kind of the 4 elements of the decarbonization strategy. We certainly have the generation portfolio piece, and so that work is being crafted and looked at a timeline, and we'll be reporting on that, I think, next month, at least where that kind of phasing of that component of the decarbonization strategy. And then there's 3 other components. It's our internal use, and so that team is already beginning to work. We've engaged a bunch of LPPC members. Matter of fact, 17 of them responded to kind of how they're looking at doing internal measures, what they're doing today, kind of successes and those kinds of things. Then the other piece is the community piece and the customer piece. And when we get to the community and the customer piece, I think in those, in that strategic initiative, you're gonna see the deep dive just to the point that you just talked about, is to begin to talk about these elements around energy conservation, around demand side management, around distributed energy and getting customer feedback and input, to really begin to craft what we think is what that customer strategy ought to look like. It'll include electrification, it'll include a number of different components, but that's the piece that we'll end up getting out of that decarbonization initiative in those specific areas.
So I know we got a lot of comments back from the public before the last board meeting. All of those comments I took that were appropriate for decarbonization and sent them to the leader that was heading up these 4 areas so that they have those to be included in what the things that they're gonna look at in each one of these components. So they didn't go into limbo, but they did go as input into how they're thinking about putting together each one of these 4 different areas for the strategic initiative.
And I would say none of those surprised us or caught us off guard. There's all those items, and when you begin to think of, I mean, here's the way I look at it, as we begin to think about decarbonization, the energy portfolio, and then we begin to get customer input, community input, we're gonna come back on that energy portfolio piece would be my guess, because as we begin to think about shaping our customer load differently, which may not necessarily be going down, right, if we begin to think about electrification and those kinds of items, but then to make sure the original decarbonization energy portfolio strategy matches up with what customers and community told us, whatever that may look like. But none of those surprised us, but as we think about that, hey, how can we, it's no different, this is the way I framed it in my mind anyway. It's like when you're thinking about resizing an air conditioner or a furnace, even for a home, make sure your envelope is as good as it can be, right? And then size it. And that's what I tell people when they say, hey, should I install a solar array? Get your energy efficiency down as low as you can get it, and then put the renewable, because that'll be a lower cost option for you when you do that. And so that's kind of what we're going to be stepping through in each one of those categories. So I think you'll see more of that as we begin to roll that out.
I would just add too, so last year we did the DSM, the demand side management potentiality study, so there is a lot of customer research that's already been done. And so the team, when that team gets kicked off within the decarb, they will take a look at that and identify what surveying needs to be done beyond that point, or can we just use what we already have based on opinions last year?
And I know we're off topic a little bit on these, but since the on-bill financing of that was mentioned, I'll just to clarify and maybe touch on, build on the point that Julie's making. I am very excited about the changes that we have made, where I'm gonna generalize, where in the past we have rushed to design solutions without identifying a problem really well in advance. we've switched that completely. We are, through the work that the marketing and product development, that Julie's team is doing, we're going out and we're talking to people. On-bill financing might be the solution, but let's not rush to that solution before we know exactly what the problem is, and we have that team leading that work, eventually engaging with our team to either build a rate or build a financing program, whatever that might be, that's also a solution. Sorry for the detour, but I think it was important.
Alright, one of the things that I acknowledge from this conversation and kind of building on Eric's question is the challenge that you have. Because we immediately went to decarbonization, right? And this is not decarbonization, this is outreach specific to Power with Purpose. That will include just kind of updating people on what the plan is for decarbonization, but that's gonna be a really important distinction to make as you go through that engagement process.
So Mary, if you could go back to the graphic that has a timeline, as you can see, it's ongoing, you know, so the journey is gonna continue, but like Julie said, we're gonna have all of these various data points that we wanna take into consideration along the way.
The outreach approach on the last slide you had up there, on the websites, how close are we to updating our website so it's easier to use and better, easier to find things on, and is that part of the bang the table approach, or is that just
Well, there's banging the table going on, it has nothing to do with that
Well,
software.
that's kind of what I was hoping, but I, you know, it's listed here as websites, OPPD.com, OPPD, you know, so where are we with redesign on that website?
So we are in the process of looking at, that's not what this is, I wanna be clear, these are changes being made to the current website to make
Okay.
it more functional to what we're talking about.
Okay,
The complete overhaul or rebuild is being discussed in terms of where it fits in the timeline, because there's other base components that relate to this, so there's a logic to getting to what you're, and that's what's creating the banging of the table.
it's the next slide, the plan slide that has the websites on it.
It does, and I will say bang the table is, it will probably, the OPPD listens, that was really our platform to have people give feedback and so forth. It was not automated at all, so
Okay.
bang the table will be a lot more user friendly
Okay.
in that regard. So we're not completely there, and you're right, we've been banging the table, but we want to give Kate and the team time to do their due diligence.
Sure.
We will get there, because this is a whole mobility play as well, because it relates to all of the devices that need to interconnect into that website. So it's a major.
And how our customers, and that's a challenge too, because our website it's one that is a governance website as well as a customer interface one, so that's a unique challenge.
Yeah, Greg, I appreciate your clarification because again, you're right, it does say power with purpose over here. And I mentioned this earlier, but I guess I read on the outreach slide, the one right before this, I mean, it said strategic initiatives including decarbonization, electric vehicles, batteries, so I apologize for moving away from the power with purpose point, but this is kind of what I mentioned earlier is that,
Totally.
I mean, I think it's really important that we clarify what is the outreach that we're doing and what is specifically what we're sharing and what we're getting back, and the two are separate. And so I managed to trap myself in something that I should not have mentioned, so I
It's a good
appreciate the
example
clarification.
for exactly what will happen
Right.
when we sit down and start talking to people about this stuff.
So I mean, I
No
think
problem.
And the group has had a lot of conversations about that, so we know the task at hand, so.
It will happen, and the thing I can say is that Lisa and her team are very focused on it.
Yeah, well aware of the pitfalls. Okay, any last questions, comments about Power with Purpose? Thank you so much for the updates, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's exciting to see it coming along.
It's moving quickly.
I'm sure it is. Okay, the last item on the agenda is to affirm a board meeting agenda. You should all have that in diligent. Looks to me like everything is tentatively scheduled to be on consent. Does anybody, any director feel the need to pull anything off consent? Again, the thought here is any comments whatsoever would necessitate us pulling it off. And that's okay, totally fine, but just we're really making a point to differentiate between the two.
Even silly comments?
Even silly comments.
I kinda wanna pull ST one off.
Okay. Sounds good, we can do that.
What was that, sorry?
Let's do one. And that makes sense, given that that's mission, vision, and values, some comments would be appropriate there.
Let's make some comments.
Okay.
I guess we don't have to explain how underground residential development is not subterranean living.
I suspect we're fine there.
And I don't want SD4 pulled out of there,
Okay,
but I just wanna say that I'm really encouraged with the direction that the utility is going in making sure that the reliability, especially in our rural areas, is being, that issue is being addressed. And
Heck, let's pull it off and give them kudos for Rulo. They don't get mentioned very much.
I just,
Yeah,
you wanna
we get a
pull
lot
it
of
off,
PR
that's
done.
fine, but I just wanted to say that I'm really encouraged with the direction the utility's going in serving our rural communities. And I can say it again at the board meeting, but
okay, 1 and 4 off.
SD1 does have some slides in it regarding reliability.
Liability.
That's true.
You could probably do it under
That's from
that.
last year's
Just a-
reliability
A
report.
point of clarification, I think in pulling it off, it's not to go through the presentation
Correct.
again, it's
No.
really to.
it's just to allow us to make a comment, so,
And public, public can
And the
make
public-
comments anyway.
well, public can make comments, but
You, just real quick confirmation, do you wanna pull 4 off, make those comments separately, or do you wanna make those comments as we talk through SD1?
I think they apply more to SD4.
Okay. Okay, we can do that. It'll give us something to do on Thursday. Okay, anything else? Okay, let me
Does it cut into the president's time then?
No, we'll give him all the time
Do you want it to cut into the president's time?
I
I can
don't know.
always shorten it up.
We had this discussion in the systems committee meeting that if Rick added to his time, that we had to take time off for Troy, so I don't know if there's a certain amount of time here and if we add time, we have to take off time from
So
somebody.
speaking of time, I wanna just quickly acknowledge that if you take the 35 minutes added to the 115, that gets us to 150 for ending time.
Oh
Pretty
my
good. Way to go.
gosh.
So kudos to Mo for putting together a tight agenda. And we're adjourned.